In today's episode, we have Deepak Krishnan.
I'm a product guy, I can change behavior very easily. Doesn't happen that easily.
You may have not heard of him, but he is easily among the startup ecosystem's most respected product and growth leaders.
I don't say operate as an operator, I say operate as a founder in an operator role.
In his earlier life, he led growth at Freecharge when they saw a 100x rise and they exit to Snapdeal for $450 million.
Say Freecharge didn't have the outcome it did, and I didn't get that outcome. You would say, dude, you're unlucky.
He then went on to become an angel investor and founded 2 companies in the healthcare and real estate space.
Founders are not all evil. There are genuinely good founders out there who reward their teams when they do great work.
He was most recently the senior director of products at Myntra, heading growth for them.
Anyone has built brand salience and recognition as well as Myntra has done.
In this episode, we speak about a ton of insights into building incredible products, insights into India's e-com industry, and seeing hyperscale with top startups and frameworks into how you become a great operator.
I think Kunal Shah had that, and he still has that mindset, right? He says that the team has done the hard work and they deserve to be rewarded. Because until that point of time, people are like, why should I go join a startup? Because clearly, when success happens, it's only the founders and VCs that take away the money. What's in it for me? And that's why I think there was this negative backlash for ESOPs. Why should I trust e-shops, etc. I think this was one of those pivotal stories that changed that narrative.
Hey man, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Pleasure to be here.
I'm so happy that you're in the box here sitting with us for the next few hours, where we actually see and I would love to kind of break down ideas around growth, marketing, and so bunch of things that you have. There's this store of information that is there with you. And a good place to begin would be, where are you at right now? Because there's some mischief you're up to. There's something that you're up to. Let's see that.
Right. If by mischief you mean the break that I'm on, then yes. I took a break from work. Again, the larger goal was to start up. But I thought that before starting up, I need some time to cool down. So, when you're working in a company, you put your heart and soul inside it, right? And you need some time to decompress from it. So a large part of my goal was largely to, take some time off to focus on laying the right foundations for building a startup. And when I say the right foundations, right, most people think, you've got the right idea, go out and meet venture funds and all that. But to me, it's more about building the right foundation from a health perspective. I think that's the most powerful resource and asset that any founder has. And I wanted to therefore take the time out to focus on my mental health and get back into building some important rituals, if I may call it so, to build what I would call as the ability to build a startup over an incredibly long period of time, right? It takes time. I can't predict how long it'll take to see success or the kind of effort required. But one thing that's super critical is, your mind needs to be sharp, your body needs to be able to go through all those pressures, stress points, etc. So I felt it was really, really critical to, use this time to lay that right foundation. So I started to go for therapy. It helps with my mental health. I'm starting to, work out a little more. So I go for swims, starting to hit the gym a little more often, trying to get my food sorted out. Trying to realize, what kind of food allergies I have today. Because the last thing you want is an allergy to get in the way of life, right? So trying to spend a lot of time trying to get that basic foundation in place. And along the way, also clearing my mind in terms of some of the perspectives and baggage that I may have in terms of how I look at the world, right? So using this time to decompress, build perspectives, really the right kind of foundation.
Let's talk about Transform.
Right.
That's the space. That's what you started. Talk about it. Like give us a brief, overview of what it was.
Right.
And what really happened there.
Right. So let's start with the genesis of how Transform came about, right? Again, if you've noticed, one of the things that I keep emphasizing on is the importance of health, right? And while I was working at previous startups, right? See, again, when you're working in startups, you get so obsessed with building products, you forget about everything, right? And back then, I wasn't so aware about the importance of health, right? So I would be working late in the hours, I think Swiggy was just probably there, or there were other delivery services. And the idea was, just press a button, just go out to restaurants, eat pizza, like eat very tasty food, drink a lot of soft drinks. I have a sweet tooth, to be very honest. I had an even bigger sweet tooth back then. So I just binge on desserts. And I realized that, probably when you're young, your metabolism allows you, but over a period of time, the one thing that we lack is, when you build a product, typically there's a very fast feedback loop. But unfortunately, in the human body, right, the feedback loop it's there. It's just that probably we're not paying so much attention. Yeah. And sometimes by the time the body gives you feedback, it's a little too late. Thankfully, it wasn't too late for me. It was just a general health checkup. And the doctor was like, dude, you're leading a very unhealthy lifestyle and you're saying you're very ambitious. Your unhealthy lifestyle and your ambition don't match together. So you might want to relook at it. So, and I could see that, right? Like, for example, climbing up a flight of stairs and I'd be like, whoa, I felt like I climbed Mount Everest at this point of time. And that made me feel really bad. And I was like, if this is taking the wind out of me, then imagine the kind of things I'd like to do and I'm just not able to, and that's really not good. So I said, okay, you know what? I have all the time in the world. Anyway, my previous startup has not worked out. I want to figure out what to do. Now it seems to be a good time to fix these things. Yeah. So
previous startup?
Yeah. So before that, so again, as you can see, right, I don't give up very easily. So just before that, I was doing a startup in the real estate space. And that didn't work out too well, but we'll come to that.
We'll come to that. I want to come to that. Yeah. You were saying something that how did you end up like figuring it out? Was it really scary, the news that the doctor gave you?
It wasn't scary. It was just, I would call it as a moment of self-realization of sorts. Yeah. Thankfully, it was nothing major. But then the kind of questions that he asked me made me realize that, hey, you know what? I should be paying a lot more attention because I could see that physiologically as well, right? For example, climbing up a flight of stairs, I'd start huffing and puffing. I'm like, wow, I feel like I've climbed Mount Everest where it's just 2 flights of stairs and I shouldn't be feeling it this way, right? So I was like, and also as a kid, right, I used to grow up watching a lot of action movies and I'd seen like Jean-Claude Van Damme doing all these crazy moves. And like, somewhere in my head, I also wanted to be like that person. But then I was not. And I was like, dude, like you can't be this... you want to be a founder, you want to be at the startup, you want to do cool things, you also want to be fit. And here I am not looking the part, not doing the part, and that's just not right. And I knew at some point that's not going to have the right kind of effect on me on the long term. So I thought, I have the time. Let me go figure out how to get in shape. And I'm the kind of person that I really need to understand why I do what needs to be done. I just can't blindly follow things. I think it's a function of how I've grown up as a child. So when I went to, a typical nutritionist, they'd say, eat poha. And I'd ask, like, why should I eat a poha? Like, help me understand why eating a poha helps me achieve this goal. They'd say, poha, it's rice. And I'm like, fine, but how does it work? Like, how does it help towards my goals? And I don't like poha in the first place. I mean, once in a while it's fine, but the idea of eating poha every morning is just not fun. And I don't think it's sustainable for me. And that got me wondering, like, when I see around folks, I see a lot of folks also probably a little out of shape, not really in the best of, body conditions. Yeah. And I used to think, okay, sure. Clearly, a lot of us are probably going to fall into this bandwagon sooner or later. Probably I'm getting a little aware early, which is good. But I need to find a way of solving this sustainably because whatever is being prescribed to me is just not making sense. And I just can't blindly follow orders as well. So I need to understand. So I said, chalo, let's understand this. So I started studying, how the human body works. I started reading up on nutrition. I started reading about physiology, metabolism, and started learning different perspectives. And I said, unless I understand the science really well, I don't think I can go about helping myself or in convincing myself this is the right thing. So at that point of time, I think the keto diet was a massive movement. A lot of my friends were doing it. And I also started doing it and I started seeing results.
When was this?
I think this was circa 2016, 17, right? I was like, okay, what is the keto diet? I started studying deeper into it. I practiced that for a period of time. But then I also started seeing that, it's not a very sustainable way of doing it, right? So I then started doing a lot of experiments on myself. I got myself a CGM, strapped it on myself. I wanted to understand, people said, it's important to understand blood sugar level, how it fluctuates. So I started doing it. So did a lot of experiments. And I think what we realized over a period of time was there are so many factors that come into how health functions. Yeah. It It's a function of what kind of job that you do. It's a function of the societies that you grow up in. It's a function of who you're probably married to as well. It boils down to your addictions that you've built as a child. It boils down to how you're wired to respond to stress. And some of these are so deeply rooted and that's why it's really difficult, right? If you look at most people, almost everyone has a New Year resolution. They wake up on 1st of January, like this year, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to start eating healthy. Then eventually life happens, right? Your boss comes to you and says, listen, you know what, this work has to happen in the next 48 hours, and you forget everything else. And so later there's more crises that happen. Stress starts building up in your life. Other priorities start coming in. And then whatever willpower that you had to get you through just collapses. And before you know it, your gym membership has come to an end. You're not going to go back to the gym. You said, I'm going to eat a salad diet. It's just not going to work. So people revert back. So most people have that very short-term goal, and we realized this as we then thought at that point of time that, we want to make this a business and we can actually really help people. Most folks were very concerned about a very short-term goal. Hey, I'm getting married, so I want to look good for my wedding. Or, I have this thing coming up in life, so I just want to look good. And then I realized, what happens after that? They'd say, well, we'll see it. We'll see what happens. So most people had very short-term goals. And again, the kind of ideologies that we had into how we'd like to build the product versus what the customer really wanted and the kind of behaviors that need to be changed. It's what I would call as an ecosystem problem. And here's where I saw that, healthcare and food industry are like hand in hand. The food industry loves to put in a lot of things into food that we think is healthy. So most of us aren't even aware of what we put into our food. And I recently saw this guy, I think called Revant, who goes by the name Food Farmer. It's really nice there are people like him out there who are actually dispelling myths about how food companies are marketing health, but in reality it's just pure BS. And we've also not spent time studying about these things, right? We spend time studying about how to be successful at work and life, etc. But the very thing that goes into our body that gives us the energy, the kind of drive that is required to see success, we don't understand it at all. So I realized that, at least the most simplest things that you can do to be healthy is just eating a lot of whole foods, doing things very gradually. You can't change things tectonically. And it also matters that you have the right kind of people around you. Thankfully, my partner, she's also turning vegan. I'm also turning vegan. It helps that, both of us are self-reinforcing to each other what is healthy, what is not healthy. Sometimes when we lose a little bit of self-control and we start telling, I feel like having dessert right now. We're like, what's a healthier alternative available? Why don't we have some fruits at this point of time? So it takes us a lot of effort. And it's not a simple problem that can be solved by technology. So, when you come from a technology background, you tend to think that technology can magically solve many things. But it's a massive ecosystem play. So I felt at that point of time that, at some point in the distant future, I'd really love to come back and solve healthcare issues preventively. But that requires a lot of patience because it requires a lot of marketing, myth dispelling for people to understand what truly health is and having the patience and persistence and also building the right kind of ecosystems. It boils down to the grocery store that you have around you. It boils down to what you have as an app on your phone. It boils down to the content that you consume. It boils down to the kind of companies that you work in. So unless people start asking these things as to what is really important, just giving a blind, simple solution saying, start measuring your blood sugar levels. Sure, I know that after eating biryani, my sugar levels are going to spike up. Great, I know that twice, I know that thrice. Now what? It's not changing my behavior. And then the question comes, okay, what are you going to do to change my biryani eating behavior? If I'm someone who's so accustomed to eating biryani, how do I then start thinking about food substitutions? How do I then start changing habits very, very gradually? And most importantly, helping people to understand that, the optical measures that you see aren't necessarily the right thing. For example, most people say, okay, I eat this, am I going to lose weight immediately? Again, nobody has the patience to see the kind of changes gradually. So I felt that maybe not the right kind of problems that I'm willing to solve right now and requires a lot more patience, a lot more, alliances that need to come together to make these kind of mega changes. And now might not be the right time, but I'm willing to wait it out to build probably the right kind of ecosystem to solve those kind of problems. So hence I felt that, those are probably very, very hard problems to change. So I think one key learning is, there are, at least here's the thing, right? When we build products, it's important to discern what are easy to shape behaviors and what are very hard to shape behaviors. And knowing that distinction helps in picking the right kind of problems. And usually, typically people who build products have that mindset, I'm a product manager, I'm a designer, I can change behavior. But it's important to know what kind of behaviors you can change. There are some behaviors which are very hard, which have a very long cycle time to change. And there are some behaviors which are slightly easier to substitute. Knowing that distinction makes a big difference. And that was probably one of the big learnings. Healthcare is a very complex problem. The behaviors are very hard, very deeply rooted.
Yes.
And hence, the patients required, the systems required, the tools required to change are different. And one shouldn't be having that, I'm a product guy, I can change behavior very easily. It doesn't happen that easily. Again, that's my limited belief. Maybe somebody out there is actually doing a fantastic job. And if there is someone out there, I'd love to meet them to know more. But this is where I said, okay, here's where I'm going to draw the line. And I'll revisit this problem statement sometime in the distant future.
So this is the thing, right? A lot of people like us actually look at our body as a way to take our brain to a meeting. Right. Essentially, that's what happens. And then eventually, of course, life catches up.
Yeah.
And you spoke about these two behaviors, right? How do you discern? How do you know that, hey, man, this is easy? Of course, logically it makes sense, but let's try and articulate that. Let's look at some examples. For example, I think food, sex, violence these are
primordial.
Yeah. So it's very hard to change those behaviors, essentially.
Right.
If there is something tempting which looks really good and companies now figure out how to make food may not be healthy but looks so tempting.
Right.
It smells so tempting.
Yeah.
And it tastes good, but then it's absolutely not good for you.
Yeah.
It's hard to resist that.
Yeah.
My mouth is watering right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there are behaviors that you're like, hey, you know what, this can be shaped. So talk to me about two things. What is the distinction? And how do you do it? For example, one is, of course, say substitution. Right? You kind of substitute something very close to it, looks similar, but it's a better behavior. That's one way to do it. But how else do you, as a product guy, as a growth guy, how do you look at that?
So I think the question I ask myself is, or if you just go back into understanding how the human brain works. See, fundamentally, as human beings, we are all trying to avoid pain and seek pleasure. So we are what I would call as a pleasure optimization machine, right? We try as much as possible to avoid things which can cause even the minutest of pains, right? And unfortunately, any form of well-being is pain-inducing, right? You have to eat, for example, if I give the example of the kind of food that I eat today, right? I've trained my mind to do this over a very long period of time. I wake up to eat raw vegetables, right? But it comes out of a lot of conditioning, right? The human mind is used to seeking pleasure because ultimately, if you look at the science, right, we optimize for 4 chemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins, right? We seek to optimize again for short-term returns, right? Because while we are in this modern day world, right, we have got cars, we have AI and all that. Most of us are still cavemen in modern day clothing, right? Nothing much has changed about it.
Yeah.
We still operate in that flight or fright mode.
Yes.
And a lot of our childhood conditioning also heavily reinforces all of those things, right? So most products which help in delivering pleasure are easier to build products. Most products that push you into the zone of discomfort, unless you put a lot of willpower, conditioning, or there is this really life-altering condition that comes in front of you, most people find it very, very difficult to change, right? So unless there's an existential crisis, most people don't. Or it's deeply rooted within. For example, if you look at some folks who have, let's say, grown up in certain households where exercise were a default part of their life, it's so innately wired where exercise is not seen as something boring, it's not seen as painful, but it's seen as pleasure. But for someone who's never exercised for, let's say, 15 years of their life, suddenly you're starting, the minute you start doing exercise, you're going to feel a little bit of body pain. The human body is like, dude, that's pain, not good for me, let's avoid it. So I think someone had put it out there a long time ago, right? If you look at most capitalistic companies out there which go out to be super successful, they hit on some of the core vices that we have at life, right? It feeds into your gluttony, it feeds into your need for pleasure, right? So
very interesting.
That's, whether you like it or not, that's the unfortunate truth. But I think there is a fine balance where you can leverage the art of seeking pleasure to delivering meaningful value for customers. And I think Google is one of those beautiful companies, right? Where their purpose is to organize information, and information helps. You're trying to basically alleviate a small pain, right? Which is say, I'm feeling that sense of uncertainty. I'm seeking for information. And that information helps me be a smarter, better person. And having that information more accessible easily to me allows me to live a better life, right? Likewise, if you look at most of their products, it's about bringing information, right? Even entertainment products, I would say, helps us in combating stress. Now, too much of everything is where the balance goes out, right? And that's where I think it's discerning as a business person, as a product person, to know where you draw that fine balance between delivering value and delivering too much, which is then probably counterproductive to that individual and therefore society as a whole. And that, I think, comes out of your value system. Someone may say, what, profits matter more, so let's just make the product super addictive. And I think that happened with a few folks who worked at Facebook at some point, coming back and counting, saying, what, I think the products that we built are probably making it way too addictive, and that's really not good. So is it important to be connected to friends? The answer is yes. Is it important for me to know what's going on around the world? The answer is yes. Is it important for me to deliver shareholder value and profits? The answer is yes. But when is it too much? I think that's where the balance comes in. So I think you can build good products which deliver pleasure, and over a period of time, probably find ways to enter into behaviors which are inherently painful and find out ways in which you can balance pain and pleasure. But it's almost difficult, at least I believe at this point of time, to start off by products which are inherently painful in nature. I think, interestingly, the guy who started Musically, which then got acquired by TikTok, Alex Zhu, also talks about a very simple principle. It says that, do not try to fight human tendencies, but go in line with it. Because in his early days, I think he wanted to start an education company. He realized that, he wanted to say, how can I make education bite-sized? But then most people aren't naturally wanting to seek out education, right? They want to seek pleasure. So he said that, I was going in the train and I just casually observed, what is it that most young people are doing? Most of them are sitting on the train, listening to music, jamming with their friends and having fun. It's very rare to find someone curiously seeking out, saying, okay, what's going on in the world around me? So he says, if you just casually observe, there are things that people are predisposed to doing. It's good to use those as segues to start building businesses, and then maybe you can go about. And today, if you notice, TikTok has actually become, there's a good chunk of people doing education on it, right?
Yeah,
you see, for example, this guy, Sharan Hegde, who's talking. Now, I'm not going to question whether what he's doing is right or wrong. That's subjective. But at least there's some form of knowledge dispersal that's happening. I think there's this girl called Miss Excel who does a lot of short videos on how to use Excel in very interesting ways. So you can see that, using entertainment, people are making it segues into slightly discomforting topics and then finding ways in which they can route them. So I find that probably a very interesting way in which people can attack very complex, painful behavior changes by probably using the pleasure route first. So that's probably how I look at it these days.
That's an interesting way to look at it as well, because I was thinking about ultra human, right?
Right.
Like you spoke earlier about how you would look at your blood sugar levels and they would spike, and it would still not change your habit.
Right.
And I was thinking about how they kind of solved it. Like I used it for a while, and the minute I visually saw it happening,
right,
and I had to you have to kind of pin it and try type biryani right there.
Right.
And I'm like, oh shit! Like this is I can't do that to myself. Like to visually see it on I would say on the screen, to like a line going up. And that's the only hockey stick which I've ever seen in life.
Right.
In growth, which actually works.
Right.
But it was very interesting to see that, and just changed my behavior.
It's possible.
Absolutely.
Not denying that at all. So again, maybe we didn't persist too deep enough to find out and the cohorts that made a difference. Again, it's a question of product market fit, right? Which audiences? Maybe Ultra Human has found the right set of audiences to whom showing analytical feedback does help in change, and maybe our miss was actually finding the right cohort of audiences. And again, with health, I always believe that you need to observe behaviors over a very, very long period of time. It's not one of those products where you can see it in 6 months to a year. I would call sustainable health changes are one where you see behavior changes over, say, 3 to 5 years, right? I also seen people who have used CGMs and revert back to the mean. So I think I would love to observe Ultrahuman over a period of time, and I would love to root for them as well. And if they do, I think they're on to something massive that can make a big difference to the world.
Yeah, seems as such, yeah. Okay, so our learnings around failure.
Right.
One is like, hey, it's definitely about human behavior.
Right.
Trying to align what you're building around that.
Right.
Looking at short term versus long term as well.
Right.
What else? Is there something else around teams?
Absolutely.
How about you as a person? Like, how were you as a leader back then?
I think I've changed quite a lot. I mean, if I look back at myself, I'm like, wow, I would find it very hard to work with myself, right? Because I think in my very early years, right, I used to have this mindset that, you're graduating from a top-notch engineering college, you've done your MBA, you're invincible, right? And I think life in interesting ways have only given me reinforced that, well, you're not as invincible as you thought you were, right? And it's been a very humbling experience. And I think that has, over the years, changed how I look at teams, how I look at working with people, how I build teams, and how I choose to build companies and what I value these days, right? So in the early days, it used to be just about, just a bunch of smart people. If you're smart enough, you can solve problems. So it's just not enough to be smart, right? I think a lot of things need to come together. And on the topic of team, right? I think today what I value more is not so much as hard skill as much as value systems, right? Each of us over a period of time in our lives value certain things more. It's about how you choose to, let's say, value family, how you value money, how you value friendship, how you value, your life partner, how you value society. All of those things matter, right? And those things do influence the kind of choices that you make in the products that you build, right? And I'm not saying one is better, one is worse. It's a question of what makes you feel that you're doing the right thing. And what do you think is justice at the end of the day, right? Some people are okay saying that, short-term revenues are more important. Some people will say, my craft is more important, right? It matters to me that the products that I build are beautifully designed. And even though it may not result in money being made, it's necessary for me to do it. And I think these are very important ideological principles that you need to identify very, very early on, because this is where then conflict starts happening. Because some of these are what I call as things that you're not going to be willing to compromise on, right? No matter what the circumstances. And unless you know these things, it becomes very difficult. And I've seen this in teams as well, right? Usually when you tend to hire people, again, you do a couple of interviews, but it doesn't show enough, and you don't get to know enough about someone's value system. And it's probably in the first 6 months that you start seeing those value systems start coming to play, because you are at some point going to be made to make hard choices. And at that point is when your value system starts coming to play. And that's what, as a manager or as a leader, you need to start looking out, because it's easy to teach skills. Like, how do you teach someone to structurally break down a problem statement? It's easier to teach. But if I were to come to you and say, hey, you need to not value this, that is going to be very offensive to you. And you can say, no, that's not how I look at life. That's not how I look at the world. That's not how I look at building products. That's not how I look at building value in the world. So as a manager, I actually encountered this very early on when I recently was at Myntra, that there was this one individual, and from his lens and his worldview, I would say what he was thinking is absolutely right. It's just that the way we looked at it was very different. And as a manager, it became very important to say, you know what, in a different world, in a different organization, what you say is absolutely right, and that organization will value. It's just so in this constraint, in this organization, in this context, this value system is not going to work well.
What was it?
I think, that would not be in the right spirit here. Okay. But I'll just say that, it's important to know that distinction of value system. Because, the minute I put it out there, it makes it very political for both the person and the company. And I'd say that both the entity and that individual are right. It's just that the context makes it very different, right? So context matters a lot. And I also realized this very early on when I was building both Transform and my previous startup company, wherein while me and my co-founder we're really close friends, and we still are today, right? sometime along, we realized that, we had very different ideologies in terms of how we wanted to build it, right? I'd seen him as an operator, he has seen me as an operator. So we both believed, we had the execution rigor. We just go out there and slam it. I love the way he would look at problems very creatively. And he would love the way I looked at products. So we thought that, hey, we're both ambitious, we're both very creative, we're hustlers, we'll get things done. But at some point we realized that, we had very different ideologies of how to build products, how to look at businesses. And once we realized that, we actually had a very honest, heart-to-heart conversation. And then we asked ourselves, why are we doing it? And, what we really value at the end of the day is our friendship, right? And it would be really bad that, I may not be able to talk to you. That's just not fair, right? And in that interest, let's ask ourselves, why do we do what we do? And then we had this very honest, and I realized I was, at that point of time, even tearing up in my eyes while I was having that conversation with him. Yeah. I had to hide it behind a pair of glasses. And he also thought about it a lot. And then we today actually feel really good that we had that honest conversation. Today he's going on to being a VC and he's probably thinking of starting his own fund at some point. And he said, you know what? It's so damn good that we had that honest conversation because I think I found my real calling in life. Because here's how I choose to look at life. And it finally made sense that maybe I'm better. I'm designed to be a VC and not so much on the operational front. Whereas you're designed to do certain things in very crazy ways, and that's who you are. But it's good that we had this honest conversation. Otherwise, we would have probably ended up banging ourselves against the wall and be very unhappy. So today, when I think about building teams, I look to seek the value that people bring to the table. Like, who are you as an individual? What do you value? What do you not value? And how does it fit into my ethos, my principles, my sense of justice? And if those things align, then I think skills we can learn. It's not like I was the smartest, but I think I was a very, very dumb person a very, very long time ago. And I've been grateful to be surrounded by people from whom I could learn to reach where I am today. And therefore, I believe skills can be learned. But the value system that I have, I don't think I'll ever change. Maybe some of this may be tweaked or modified over a period of time. Should I hear some very, groundbreaking truth? But that's going to be a very rare phenomenon, right? In terms of how I say, for example, I had this very interesting conversation with my ex-boss, a mentor of mine, who's working in a really large e-commerce company today. In terms of, when we talk about value creation, right, we all talk about, profit being created. But then we ask ourselves, what is profit and at what cost? The enterprise is successful, the organization is successful, shareholders are successful. But is it really successful if, let's say, 10 of my employees were ill? Is it worth it then? And we then talked about, net value creation, wherein if health is also eroding, it means something is being destroyed. So is there a way in which we can create truly, truly positive value where all systems of or all assets are going up and not down? Right? For example, if it results in someone's family breaking apart, right? Say someone by virtue of being hardcore at a job, their life goes through a divorce, and that person is actually deeply down, depressed. Sure, he's made a couple of $1 million, but then he's sad, depressed that he's lost his wife, lost his kids, and he's never able to recount with them again. Have we really created value then? Right? And who have we created then value for? Have I not then eroded somebody's value then to create value somewhere else? So when we put these kind of guardrails, and I'm trying to answer the hard question, how can we then create truly, truly net positive value for everyone? And when I say value, it's just not economical value, it's also societal value, right? I wouldn't wish someone to have ill health and end up in a hospital and, suffer for the sake of somebody else's profitability. That's just not probably right for me, because I would not want to be that person, right? If I was working for someone, I wouldn't end up in a hospital and saying that, boss, you made $10 million, but my health has taken a hit, and that's just not right. So I wouldn't be comfortable doing those kind of things, right? I'm not questioning anyone else here, but that's where I draw the line, right? And therefore, I'm looking to find people who may have similar value systems in terms of how to put together teams.
How do you find it? How do you, it's so easy to...
It's easy to say.
Yeah.
And it's also very difficult because, when you put it out there, most people somehow or the other inherently start with an agenda, right? Okay, how do we join forces, etc. So the best way, I think, is to just be organic and go around with people. And over a period of time, I think, and this is something that I keep saying to people, This is true for products and true for life as well. What people say, what people do versus what they say they do are very, very different. So I choose to observe people's actions more than what they say. It's easy to look at the words, but then I look at consistent behavior over a period of time. And if your actions speak louder than words, and most importantly, when nobody's looking, I think that's your true colors, right? When you don't have to put on a show. And in really awkward situations, are you being yourself and are you genuinely standing up for something? I think that's when you get to see someone's value system. When there's injustice happening around, is that person actually stepping up and saying, you know what, this is wrong. And even at the cost of my job, at the cost of what you perceive or any kind of economic gains, I'm going to say that is wrong. That's when I know that, okay, these are the kind of people I'm going to surround myself with. That's the kind of person I'm going to want to go to war with, because I know this person is going to do, no matter what the circumstances, the right thing. And it takes time to find it. So you can't force this, nor can you, which is why in terms of even today when I'm trying to build a team, I'm willing to give it the time, because you need that time to find that kind of individual who's going to demonstrate that value consistently over a period of time. I think, and that's why if you look at it, right, I think people who have probably gone to the same schools over the period of time, that years of observation has allowed to individuals to probably see their value system. And they say, you know what, your value system's aligned with mine, and therefore it makes sense to work together and do something crazy together. And I think one of the stats that also come out, right, apart from the fact that there is a bad market fit, co-founder fallouts is also one of the biggest reasons why startups fail. So it then becomes important that you invest time to identifying people of values. And that matters even in companies, right? If you just bring together a bunch of alpha personalities who are super sharp in their skills, they may never connect at a value system level. And that then results in the team just breaking apart. Because one person says, you know what, my success matters more than anybody else's. And therefore, I'll do whatever is right for me to make me succeed. But you're not thinking team first. Or you're willing to probably put somebody else's value system at risk. And the other person may be like, you know what, I'm not feeling very comfortable with this. You may be the smartest person on the planet, but you've not made me feel good. And you're not making what I stand for sound right. So sorry, we can't work together. So those things start breaking the team apart. So today I overemphasize on identifying people's value systems. And skill is important, but I would put value first, skills next. Sorry, that was a very long monologue on the importance of values.
I'm taking it all in. And I'm also like thinking of how in all of this and in the space of startups, how you're not indexing on speed, like as a byproduct of this, because most founders have this need for
speed.
Just being, speed. I didn't want to say that, but but NFS. So it's very, very interesting, right? Because there is this thing that, hey, you got to do it fast, you got to build fast, ship it fast.
Yeah.
And the same thing, what you are essentially saying is that, hey, there is no shortcut.
Yeah.
There is no way for you to really know what the value systems are.
Yeah.
You gotta trust your gut somewhere, figure out that the rest of the things like skills and everything else matches, and then go on their journey and then discover. And this is more from hiring perspective. And if it's a co-founder, then hoping that you have had enough exposure with them so that you know what works for you and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Talk to me about before Transform. You said there was something in real estate. I just kept that thing.
Right.
What was that? What were you doing? And how did it even happen? Like, how did a smart guy with an MBA who thinks, everything is, how did he end up in real estate? What was the insight there essentially for you?
See, I wouldn't call it an insight today as much as just ambitious vision of the world, which again is another learning, right? Sometimes, you read too much of folklore in terms of the power and importance of vision, but there's a time and place for vision. And I think most startups, I believe, should not start with a vision. Right? Because I think it fixates you too much on a grandiose version of the world without even rooted into some form of reality.
Yeah.
So you start trying to create a world. And it's possible to do that. And I think it's possible when you have a lot of capital and you have a lot of brand in the market. So for example, someone like an Elon Musk who sits on $200, $300 million after having sold his previous company. Like when you have those kind of capital, you can take those kind of ambitious, world-changing vision views. But as someone who is like, limited on cash and limited on, perception or brand, you need to be very conscious on the choice of problems that you pick. So at least, again, the reason why I went into real estate is I used to look at the way, urban cities were planned, and I felt that it was just badly designed, right? From a variety of angles.
Absolutely.
Right? Bangalore, if you take, like, one of the conscious calls I took in terms of when I said that, I'll join a company is I said I'll never ever commute beyond the means of walking. So every office has to be walking distance. Otherwise, I'm never taking the company, no matter how attractive the offer is. Myntra had to be that oddball there because they said you could work from home. So I said, fine, that works with me, right? Because, congestion, the way cities were built. And I've seen this from two fronts, right? One in Bangalore, growing up in Chennai, I've seen it to be so badly designed. I've seen it in terms of, when I had that brief opportunity to visit San Francisco while working at Zynga, in terms of how people used to live there. Is to feel that, there had to be better ways of designing urban cities. And I felt that, one interesting place that we could start off, probably because I've seen how homes were designed, both in the US and in India. I felt, urban spaces were really, really badly designed. And again, these were real estates or, properties built many, many years ago in a different context altogether. So I feel, for a lot of young people today, the cost of rent is just outrageous. And I felt this problem in Bangalore, right? When I moved in, just finding a house took me a lot of time. I still think people do take a lot of time to find homes. Even in the US, I think the rents are just outrageous. And I felt that, maybe is there a creative way in which homes could be designed better? And I stumbled upon this very interesting, behavior in, I think, some of the European countries where people lived in what I'd call as tiny homes. And they used to have very modular furniture, which could be just moved around. So think of it as a 4-in-1 house where the same space could function as a bedroom. And then you move this bed around and then it becomes your living room. You move it around and it becomes your workspace, and then you move it around and it becomes something else. I was very fascinated by it. Like, wow, what would happen if you can actually bring this concept mainstream? And you could think about really changing urban living, right? Because for a lot of us, at least I think when I was single, I didn't need more than a bedroom because you're spending most of your living days outside. You're at your office, you're out having fun. You're just coming home for sleeping. So why do I then need to spend so much of money was the thought process then, right? So again, back in the day, my ambition was, can I go to do this in the US? I actually went, tried this in the US for a couple of months. Worked with a couple of landlords, tried to redesign apartments, being completely ignorant on the fact that, I'm working on a 6-month visa and I had to at some point come back to India. I was trying hard to figure out ways to get it done. Then I said, okay, if it doesn't work in the US, can I try pulling this off in India? So I went to Mumbai, stayed there for a couple of months. And because I've seen in Mumbai as well, the cost of real estate is enormous and the housing prices are just off the charts and people would pay a bomb. So I thought, could I do something there in that real estate space, redesigning living spaces to face rather interesting problems there, wherein it was no longer about real estate, but it was also about culture and community, where people would say, unless you're from XYZ community, you really can't live in this building. And I'm like, whoa, that's something I didn't see from afar. How do I solve for this? And that just makes the complexities even harder, right? Because let's say you're trying to even build or redesign apartments. You want to optimize it such that you can get most people to move in, right? But then you're now confined to saying, okay, you can only get XYZ community members to move in. That problem just becomes a lot more amplified. So I was like, tried a couple of iterations, variations. Then I said, okay, this is just moving too slow for my own joy, because I'm really not building things fast. It's too slow for me as an individual. It sounds exciting from far, but up close, it's too slow as a business. And I think I'm losing the joy of building products here. And there are too many other variables which I don't enjoy dealing with. So maybe not the right thing. So from there, we pivoted and tried to do it in the workspace. So we then had a new thesis saying, okay, can we make workspaces elastic in nature? And we had a very ambitious notion that, eventually people will have to work remotely because it's just too much of a pain to commute every day. So what if we help larger organizations set up remote works offices. And we had this thesis, let's make things very elastic in nature. Let's reutilize assets which are underutilized. Again, that very Airbnb philosophy. We said, can we apply that principle here? So we started actually talking to a lot of landlords, bar owners, alternate assets, and see if we could convert them into workspaces. And we did that for a period of time. But again, at that point of time, I don't think remote work was a massive movement yet.
When are we
This was
talking about?
circa 2016. So we actually tried speaking to some very large organizations. They said, yeah, we could pilot a couple of things. We got a lot of early startups who, attempted to use it. It did work for a period of time, but we didn't have enough inflow. And that kind of made the business also very slow growing. And also one of my principles is, if you've been growing too slow for too long, despite working with the right kind of audiences, then it probably means you've not got the right kind of product market fit. And I'm probably going to burn myself out in this process. So I said, okay, interesting market, but it's just too slow moving for me. And I said, you know what, let's call it quits. Let's figure out something else to do. So that's how we went into the real estate space. And again, the pace at which your product grows, again, when you have good product market fit, you can see it. It grows fast enough. And I think it requires, somewhere some humility to say, it's not working out. So it's okay to call it a day and dial back and find something new to do. So that was the journey and adventure in the real estate space.
It's very interesting. So the intention of this is to figure out Deepak, right? So as a designer of spaces,
Right.
as a designer of lifestyle,
Right.
in how you look at health, essentially. So I think design is a big part of who you are. And again, I would say designing experiences, because the minute you speak about delight, which
Right.
is something I would love to kind of dig deeper on as well.
Right.
So is that a big part of how you look at things, as in like how you can design something, or is it more about like, hey, this is what I'm making, and now it's just about like finding the right audience and just kind of fitting it in somehow?
I think the early days, it used to start with I would love to design things and put it out there. But I think today I'm slightly more mature to say, let me find the right problem for which I'd like to design great experiences. It has to be a meaningful problem. It has to be an inherent behavior which is worthy of coming up with a better design for, wherein I feel that, the current journey is not ideal enough. So yes, you could say that design is a very core part of me, though I'm not a designer per se. I like the idea of designing experiences end to end, right? And I think that is something that has probably stemmed from childhood. Because I do recall growing up, I would love to sit and design cars. I would love to draw motorbikes out. Because these were objects that I found very fascinating. I was very fascinated by the Walkman when it came out. I found it to be one of the most mind-blowing pieces of technology that I've ever encountered. Like the idea of carrying music in your pockets anywhere you go, and you can just zone out wherever you go, was just magical. So when I see these kind of products, I think I got influenced by a lot of hardware products very early on in life. And I still do at some point of time in the future want to build hardware products. But over a period of time, I think I've also seen the magic and beauty of digital products and designing digital experiences. So I think that childhood passion of designing things has stuck very strong in me. And I think that's probably what shaped me to pick problems on very early on, to say, can I design better products without really understanding the first principles or the markets behind it? Now I'm like, okay, real pragmatic, let's put the guardrails of, is that a good market and all of those things. And then ask the question, hey, can you build truly mind-blowing designs? And I think one design principle that I fell madly in love with was, when I heard it for the first time, was by Brian Chesky from Airbnb. And he talks about 10-star design experiences, where he said, you find a meaningful problem, and then you go out at this, unconstrained way of saying, what is a good 3-star experience? What's a good 4-star experience? What's a 5-star experience? What's a 7-star experience? And maybe subconsciously at some point, I used to also ask myself this question, because when I really care for someone, I go out of my way to, when it's really important for them to create delightful experience, I say, okay, what's going to truly blow them out of their minds, right? And what do I know about them? How can I design experience? So like when I think about throwing someone a birthday party or throwing a party, so I love throwing parties or, throwing events. And I would think, what would make people come and then walk away with this insane sense of emotional high, which is really, really hard and unique to create. So I think I find out numerous ways in expressing this desire to create these 10-star experiences. And I think that probably is a very core part of me. So that's...
So talk about that. I want to. So have you been able to break it down? Like, what are the elements of really good experiences? Like, there's an element of surprise for sure.
Right.
There's an element of knowing that, oh, you know this. Like if you figured out that, oh, I don't like milk, and you kind of design around it. I'm like, oh. Like, so there is, I would say, empathy, if I break it down to,
True.
That's the thing. So that's an element. What else are elements of this delight? I don't know how to define it. Like, what is delight?
Let's put it this way. When you say you're feeling delighted, right? It's an emotion that you're feeling, right? Ultimately, again, it boils back to us being a soup of emotions, right? Dopamines, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. That's what we're trying to maximize. And whenever we feel good, it makes life worth living, right? It means that, wow, this was beautiful. And when you ask yourself, what are the things that make life feel delightful? When you have a sensory experience, or you see something visually beautiful, or eat something really tasty, like, it impacts your senses, right? So ultimately it boils down to maximizing emotions, right? And how do you then, the question then becomes, if you want to delight someone, the question becomes, how do you then heighten their emotions? And when you want to heighten their emotions, then you have to ask themselves, okay, what do you know about that individual, which really is in the lines of delight, right? You have to know about them to be capable of delighting someone, right? So then it becomes really, really important for me to go down to understanding that person's likes, dislikes to a great extent, right? And a really important part of it is what you said, right? Serendipity or unexpectedness. When you do something when it is least expected is when the delight factor just goes 10x. For example, let's say you buy a product on Myntra, and you made that mistake of making, let's say, a choice of a wrong product. But let's say I understand that it's very likely that you don't have the wrong intention by which you made that choice. It's very human. I would have done the same thing. And if I was saying that, you know what, I understand you, I got it, I could have done the same mistake, and I decide to go above and beyond and do something and say replace the product or find a better product for you, you're bound to be right, because most people at that point of time will be like, dude, not my problem, it's your fault. So when you do things unexpectedly and also do it around things that really, really they like or they love, and bring in a little bit of what I would call as creativity in terms of how you deliver that, I think that's when delight factors just shoot through the roof. And I think I look at movies as a great source of delight. I look at amusement parks as a great source of delight. I look at travel as a great source of delight. I think hospitality industry teaches you a lot. So I look at these kind of performant arts or experience deliveries to ask myself, okay, what kind of patterns can I take away from that which make me go, wow? And then ask myself, at every point in a customer's journey or every point in someone's life, am I doing something that makes them go, wow, this is truly delightful. Nobody would have done that for me, right? So again, I don't think probably I have it's probably still a very raw process that I somehow channel out. Maybe I don't have a very clear structured approach to other things. Maybe because it somehow comes a little naturally to me, that I haven't spent even too much time thinking about, wow, is there even a methodical way to artificially create a framework for delight? But I think this is how I've been thinking about it till date. But now that you've asked me this question, maybe I need to go back home and see if I can put a method to this at the end of the day.
It's interesting. Like, there are two things here, right? One is to figure out a way to actually create delight.
Yeah.
And the other would be how do you keep doing it? Because you create a way. You're like, hey, this is really interesting. This will be a very positive experience. I go on that journey the first time. I love it. I share it with my friends. I tweet about it and all of that.
Yeah.
But then it becomes a habit. And then if you don't do it, then I'm super pissed because now that's the normal. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's great. But then that puts the burden on a product guy to now figure out another new way to delight me. Because
Absolutely.
now I'm not even delighted by that anymore. Now my dopamines and everything is like flat. Like I'm like, oh, this should definitely happen. Like if this Myntra, and they should definitely do this. Like it's a known fact.
I would also say then it acts as a competitive advantage, right?
Yes.
Because if you have, let's say, learned the spirit of delighting customers over and over again, and let's say you build a good framework for it and you're continually putting out that, you're creating a remarkable difference between who you are and who the other folks are operating in the market, right? Because what is baseline established by my company is remarkably different. And if it's compounding over a period of time, I'm constantly also raising the bar. So maybe 10 years from now, the bar that I've set for delight is so different that people are just going, wow, it's just so different. But it also makes the job harder, right? And I think that also adds a little joy to the work that we bring in. Otherwise, if you have to do the same thing every day, I think a lot of creative folks would find it just absolutely boring. It's like, dude, just done that again. But if you're being forced to think about, okay, we've done all of this, and now this is the new normal. What more can you do? Then that also puts into a little bit of a challenge mode, right? And I think it's those kind of hard constraints, those kind of challenges which take civilization forward, right? If we all were very happy with the mainstream behavior, I don't think any kind of innovation or delight would have ever happened, right? So I think it's really, really important that you become your own challenge, right? And I think we need to make ourselves more irrelevant. Like the harder I try to make myself more relevant, the harder I'll try to also make myself relevant over a period of time. So I think it's a very important aspect of building products. And if you don't want to be pushed doing that, then yeah, no questions there. I think that's a choice of the ideology of the kind of products that you're building. And there are products which can sustain over a period of time, maybe doing that. But maybe that's not the kind of product I would love to build. And that's the kind of product that most people would enjoy consuming.
What are you enjoying right now? What has in the recent past given you delight? Maybe in the hardware product space, the software, like, the all of that tech stuff, or maybe something even like maybe restaurant or something. Where were you recently delighted, and what was that?
I think the most recent was one when we were on a travel trip to Bali, and we were just delighted by the amount of incredibly tasty vegan food. And I love, especially since I've become vegan, or I'm trying to become vegan, I still have once in a while some dairy products. Food does get sometimes boring, and I then start looking for new and interesting flavors. And then we found some really interesting restaurants which found out some amazing ways of concocting vegan dishes, very healthy, very tasty. And I was like, wow, this is truly mind-blowing. So we've then started to see if we can deconstruct that back home. So that was one truly, truly delightful experience. Travel personally is very delightful for me because I think I love nature at heart. And whenever I see new experiences like the beauty of the ocean, the calmness of a forest, it's just mind-blowing, right? And from that lens, I think there was this space that we stayed in through an Airbnb, which was stunningly beautiful. It's this very simple house that overlooks a sort of a ravine of sorts, where there's a small river flowing in the middle. So I find a lot of delight in nature. So I think that trip was truly, truly magical. In recent times, I've found generative AI to be truly, truly delightful. Because once in a while, whenever I try to delight someone, I try to make something for them. And I used to design things on Photoshop. And this time around, when I used the newer version of Photoshop, my workflows just became 10x better. And when I started creating, like, wow, the pace at which I could just create things is just so magical. And I was like, this is truly groundbreaking, because the amount of effort that I used to do to create this work probably about a couple of years ago would probably be about a month or so.
Wow.
And now, because I'm not a professional Photoshop guy, so the way I do it is I look up on tutorials on YouTube, and then I go back and try it and somehow make something, right? But this time around, the workflows have become so simple. It's as simple as just point and click. And I'm like, this can practically make anyone a reasonably good designer. Not saying that, there are great designers out there. I'm just saying, the entry barrier for people trying to at least do design is just brought down, that you're able to creatively express. Because otherwise, the amount of time that you need to learn the skills is incredibly high, and now it's just brought down a lot more. So I found that to be truly, truly difficult because it was a way for me to deliver value to somebody else. And I was like, the extent to which I can now deliver value to somebody else has just exponentially increased. And what I can do to come up with variations and styles, and for me to even explore that creative space has just become so much more. I found that to be truly, truly delightful. These were probably the things that stood out the most in recent times that at least top of mind recall talks about delight.
So design, right? We were talking about design. And what better is from me talking to you about gaming, which is design. I think we should talk about that.
Sure.
But I'm so keen to actually talk about Myntra because you brought it up as well. Let's start from start. Like, let's start from how did that even happen? Like, where were you before that? Like, what's happening in your life?
I was on probably yet another mischievous break.
Mischievous breaks, right? Deepak's mischievous breaks.
Yeah, so I was just wrapping up Transform.
Okay.
And I was thinking, what should I do next? And I really don't have any interesting idea to work on. And I could probably spend my time, going around figuring things out, or maybe try to put myself again in the company of really smart people. And then I asked myself, okay, what is sort of good places to figure this out? And what are probably some unknown questions that I'd really like to get some clarity on? For example, how has Flipkart become the size it has? Or how has Myntra become the size it has? Really, there must be something that they've done right. And maybe if I inject myself into one of these organizations, I could learn some good practices and at least put some of my hypotheses to test. So it was very serendipitous that while I had these companies in the back burner, one fine day, Lalita, who had just joined Myntra, probably I think a little earlier than I had, reached out to me saying, hey, we're looking for someone to join and head growth hacking. So I was like, well, why not? I love fashion and would be happy to explore opportunities. So that's how it started. So joined the team in, I think, 2020, if I'm not wrong, and joined the growth hacking team.
So they would call it growth hacking?
Like it was called the growth hacking team.
Okay. And they didn't have it before.
So there was a team set up. There was someone else leading it, and that person had left. So they were looking for someone else to come in and lead the growth
team
hacking
existed.
The team existed. And they'd asked me to come in, and I said, why not? I've done growth hacking in the past. Shouldn't be too difficult. So joined in, only to realize things were a lot different from what I'd anticipated.
You hadn't done it in the past.
I've done growth.
You've done growth
multiple times in the past. Again, context differs, culture is different. So how people, let's put it this way, right? The problem with product, the problem with growth, and problem with growth hacking is it's too many ideologies, right? Everyone has a way of looking at it, right? Therefore, when I went and saw it, the way I expected it to be was what it was very different. And I said, okay, cool. There are some interesting things about it, and there are things that definitely need to be rethought up, grounds up, and started taking responsibility for it and started showing some good momentum for the team. I inherited a fantastic team. And there were a couple of really rock star players who then evolved to doing some really great things over the course. I will talk about that as well. So started with the growth hacking team. And then at some point we needed to restructure the organization, and then I got more responsibility. So expanded it from just pure growth hacking to the overall growth charter.
Okay.
And also then newer opportunities came in, and I took on social commerce. So when I last left, I was looking after all things to do with traffic generation at scale, growth, which we structurally then break down acquisition, retention, loyalty, and also the core platforms, which help in building infrastructure capabilities, and then new business opportunities such as social commerce. This is a spectrum of products that I was looking at. So organically evolved to getting more and more opportunities. So that was the journey at Myntra. A lot of interesting things learned along the way. I had a fabulous team, and I must say, I don't think that I've achieved anything that I had without the backing of my team, many of whom have grown like exponentially, right? So there's this girl called Ifra who was in the growth hacking team, who probably just completed about a year as an APM, and I'd seen her the ability to lead teams and to transition to take on more responsibilities. So I felt, you know what, I can give the responsibility of the entire growth hacking team. Why don't you just run this charter for a while for me, while I look into new charters and come back and take. And she was able to, as an APM, stepping up to responsibilities above and beyond her call of duty and running the show. I was like, wow. Likewise, I was very fortunate to have someone called Pushkar who came on board to lead acquisition. At that point of time, we didn't even have a team to look at acquisition, right? No engineering team, no design team. Most PMs at that point of time would have been very frustrated and be like, I don't have a team, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
But this person said, you know what? I'm going to use this time to dive deep into the problem statement, understand it, put a structure to it, and methodically pull out a framework to attack that. And it allowed us to then go out and sell a big picture and get a lot of funding and deliver some insane outcomes on acquisition. Likewise, every other person that I've had in my team, Sashi, who took over CRM, like CRM is one of our core systems that drive engagement and retention. It was one of the most, it was a charter which was consistent in what I would call as wartime, right? Every month, every quarter, there's a crisis of sorts. And when he came on board, he was able to methodically take over it, put a lot of structure toward it. And today it's like one of the most efficient product orgs driving some insane value. Ankita, who came in and looked after loyalty, there's been a ton of folks that I've seen at Myntra. I've hired folks who have not even come in from technical backgrounds. So there's a guy called Sangeet who comes from a banking background.
Wow, okay.
Who did his undergraduate in physics. So from physics to banking. And he said, you know what? I really want a chance at taking product management. And you know what I've been doing? I've been learning about technology. I've been learning how to code. And I was like, wow, like someone who's really going above and beyond. I'm going to give this guy a chance. And he came in, and today he manages one of the most technical charters in Myntra, right? For someone who's never built technical products, someone who's come from a world of banking, someone who has gone on from the world of physics to come into the world of product management and building deeply technical products is fascinating. So I think I've been very, very fortunate to have a stellar team behind me at Myntra to create some insane value, plus a leadership that trusted me a lot to create some really, really crazy outcomes. But yeah, I felt that now was the time to step out to do something of my own, which has been long with the charts. So that's been my journey at Myntra.
How do you do that? Like how do you you're doing so well, and then how do you just decide one day that, or is it like too innately your natural state of being is being a founder, and then everything else is
everything else is probably
taking you there, building you to that.
Yes. So again, like I said, right, the reason why I wanted to join Myntra and be a part of the Flipkart group was to identify certain key learnings into how these companies got built. And eventually the goal was to go out and start up. In fact, the running joke was when they hired me, I think the panel discussion was, how long do you think he's going to stick in Myntra? And people were putting bets. They're like, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. But surprisingly, it's there for about a good 2.5 years. Because the problems were very exciting, and I really loved what I did. And I loved the team I worked with. So that made the journey there to last a lot longer than most people anticipated. But my natural state is to go out and build something of my own and build a great team around it and deliver value. So I would consider that Myntra was a very, very meaningful pit stop. And I'm very grateful to Lalita for having identified me, giving me that chance, taking a bet on me. Because if anyone looked at my career graph, they'd be like, why should you take a bet on someone who has such an erratic career graph and then give them a position of a senior director in a company? It was a very contrarian bet that she took. So it also shows the kind of leadership skills that she brought to the table in terms of identifying talent. And I'm fortunate that way to have been that person, and also fortunate to have had that great team and her support and a lot of other great folks from engineering, design, to have worked alongside me, from whom I've learned as well, to had a fabulous journey at Myntra. So that was my, it almost seems like, I joined just Myntra yesterday. So it seems like the journey has come to a standstill a lot shorter than I anticipated. But then the pressing desire to go on and build that company was a lot stronger. And I think I've got a great team that continues to deliver insane value. So I'm really happy that they're taking that journey forward.
Let's break it down. Let's break Myntra down even more.
Sure.
So first thing you said was, hey Adhar, I thought growth would be something,
right,
but it ended up being something else.
Right.
That's something that even I struggle with, right?
Right.
How do you figure that out? Like, how is it that JDs and conversations around like, hey, this is what we want to do, and yes, I'm specifically talking about growth, and we want to like talk about that, but it is overall happens to a lot of people that they think their role is going to be something,
right,
but it ends up being something else. So let's talk about you, right?
Sure.
Like, what were you thinking of? Like, before that, you had done growth a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
So when was the first time you did that?
I think the first time I did growth was at Free Charge.
Yeah.
I mean, I did probably parts of that at Zynga as well. To just give a little backstory, right? In Zynga, you usually have revenue PMs and growth PMs.
Yeah.
Right. Ultimately, your job is to either optimize for revenue or for engagement and user growth. Right. So that's where I'd learned my basics, and then I'd gone on to lay the foundation a lot stronger at Free Charge, and repeated at a few of the companies that I consulted, and then had shaped it to a point where I felt that it could be repeated and replicated across organizations.
Yeah.
So when I went to Myntra, the approach that they had was, again, were they looking to optimize for revenue? The answer was yes. But the questions around how do you optimize for revenue? I think that's where the difference comes in, right? And the way, again, these are ideological differences, like I said, right? The way the previous growth team used to run was, it was a very empowered team. People could say, let's just build X, Y, Z. And so long as an impact happened, everyone was happy. Where I brought in a slightly different point of view was to say that, impact is good, but impact needs to be aligned so that the effect can start compounding, right? And that matters in terms of what problems that you pick and how you choose to sequence these problems so that they start having a compounding effect. For example, there are a lot of interesting problems that each of my team members brought to the table. And I said to them, each of these ideas by themselves are great ideas, right? None of them are wrong, right? But we need to at some point see if they are adding up to each other and compounding. So what are we going to align them with? Which direction do we choose? Where do we think is the best optimization angle? So we spend some time trying to, break up growth systematically, right? If you, again, break down revenue systematically, it breaks down into, number of users multiplied by dollar value per users. Again, if you break up users, it's new users and repeat users. If you break up your repeat users, you have the different cohorts at different stages in the funnel. So we built this very mathematical model, and then ask, if we were to put the same amount of effort at different touch points in the journey, where are we going to get the maximum ROI, right? And therefore, it allows us to identify the right cohorts of people to go after, the right touch points in the funnel to optimize. And it says that, okay, if this is the zone we need to optimize for, then what are the leading hypotheses to why this zone is not as efficient as it should be? So we created probably if I'm not wrong, a 4x4 matrix or a 4x6 matrix, and identified probably 3 to 4 key hotspots and said, these are the key touch points we're going to optimize for. And for the next quarter, obsess only about this zone. Do not think about anything else. The team was like, but we get success in other parts. I'm saying, you're right. But this approach is going to concentrate all of our efforts, and we're bound to see compound effects because everything is aligned to a singular North Star metric in this localized zone. So previously, let's say you're optimizing something on the homepage. The other time you're optimizing something on the PDP page. Sometime down the line, you're optimizing something down the page. Each of these are local area optimizations. But what if we were to just concentrate all of our efforts on just, let's say, the cart page for the most loyal customers? Now, your loyal customers are the ones who are generating the most amount of cash flow, right? They generate, let's say, for any startup or any e-commerce company, there'll be some form of Pareto going on there. And for even these users, there will be some inefficiencies that they're facing, and their behaviors have drastically changed. And this is something that we're missing out for them. So when we started doing that in the first quarter, we started seeing some really, really high numbers jumping through the roof, right? And that's when the team was like, oh, wow, this methodical approach towards identifying growth is a good way of attacking growth. So then I said, cool, now that you've learned this technique, I'm going to divide this responsibility. Each of you are going to be responsible for certain parts of the zone. And you just start diving deep and coming up with your own hypothesis, do your own rigorous analytics around that. So the key to growth is not just growing, it's about generating compounding growth and identifying the right flywheels which allow you to build velocity over a point of time, right? So that's one element of growth. The second element of growth is also putting in what I would call as structures to validate truths as quickly as possible. So one of the big ideological differences that I was trying to sell to the organization is it's not just enough to unlock revenue, because then you're just going to be chasing some rather obvious ones and we're not going to learn certain truths. And the key to unlocking growth is identifying truths. So we said, rather than probably calling ourselves as the growth team, internally we should call ourselves as the truth-seeking team, right? How quickly can we unlock the truth about certain beliefs that we have about certain customers that we otherwise would not find out? And there are many pathways to truth, right? You can speak to customers and observe their behavior. You can do a lot of data deep dives. But sometimes, despite doing all of that, there is the difference between the rubber hitting the road, right? And sometimes you have to put something out there for you to get real quantifiable feedback. So we said, the sooner we put something out there, the faster we learn. And therefore, it boils down to then how we design products as well. So the second big change that we said to ourselves that we'll do as an organization is, how do we identify the fastest way to build the most meaningful set of features, quickly put that test out there to see what about our hypothesis is failing. And we need to see this hypothesis as a chain of hypotheses. If this fails, test the next hypothesis. If this fails, eventually you will start seeing some of these hypotheses either turn out to be true or false, which allows you to have a better and stronger understanding about how customers perceive your value of offering. For example, when we were looking at our search page, right? The general theory is that in fashion, when you show a lot of selection, it's mind-boggling, and therefore you need to work on reducing that clutter. So if you probably show less selection, it's going to help in optimizing your funnel, because lesser selections to go through, right? We found that to be rather counterintuitive. The results actually bombed. We actually found there is merit in customers going through a lot of content. Reason being, fashion is one of those categories where people aren't looking for a product. For example, you search for blue t-shirt. There are permutations of blue t-shirt, and no matter how good I know you, there is bound to be some design that doesn't strike a chord with you. So the key is actually having not too much of a selection as well. The key is also not to have too less of a selection. The key is to have that ideal spectrum of selection for a given search query so that your conversion rate grows up. So then our learning was, oh, wow, we shouldn't really also take away the serendipity of cutting down and the joy of browsing as well. And that requires for us to rethink about how we think about filters, how we think about search results, how we think about using any other optimization techniques to show the right kind of results to customers as well. So a lot of counterintuitive learnings then start coming together. And unless we put this out really fast, we couldn't do it. So the third ideology about growth as well is, typically when people attack growth, they think about how do I create impact at scale, which is actually a very detrimental way of solving, because when you're trying to solve for scale, you're also trying to solve for a lot of technical challenges. And then typically what happens is you end up building an incredible monstrosity even before identifying what works with an organization or what works with a particular customer cohort group. So we then said, you know what? You need to find out ways in which you can build really tiny products, put it out. It's okay that these aren't the best in class products. It's okay, but it doesn't mean they're terrible products. They're usable products. They're meaningfully delightful, but they're not the best in class experiences. And we need to put them out really quickly, learn those hypotheses. And then once we know it works, then let's go back to the drawing table and then ask ourselves, how do we build a scalable solution around it, right? This allows you to reduce your cycle time for your product going to market. So defining the right scope of product, avoiding premature scaling, and aligning a lot of your initiatives to fit into a particular direction allows for growth to compound. So I call this as, this is a very mathematical or a very structural way of approaching growth. And also balancing the difference between short-term, mid-term, and long-term. Sometimes you need to do things to unlock short-term growth, which is revenue. Sometimes you do need to take calls which necessitate you to think of long-term growth, which is to think about, hey, how do you build fundamental components, which is like, how do you build programmatic marketing at scale? Or how do you build a whole new value proposition to a new cohort of customers? And you need to give the time to the teams to identify new hypotheses, experiments, and build the right kind of ecosystem. So you cannot use the same framework for growth. So that's the problem, right? Most people look at growth and growth hacking as, how can I unlock growth really quickly? But the problem is you may more often than not see sustainable growth coming out of it. More often than not, they may not be compounding in nature. And more often than not, they may not unlock a lot of ground truth for you. So these were some of the core guiding principles that we put in for the growth team to rethink of growth. And we call this the Growth 2.0 at Myntra. And hopefully somebody will figure out Growth 3.0 in Myntra soon enough. So that's the essence of growth.
So, and what were the learnings? Like like in the sense, let's talk about Indian consumers. So Myntra, we'll talk about the industry in the marketplace in a while. But before we go there, let's talk about, like, you were so close, and to seek truth, you're talking to users, figuring them out. And as you said earlier, right, not just talking to them and figuring out what they're saying, but then also looking at how they're behaving.
Right.
What were some insights? What are some insights about how Indians? Obviously, the obvious ones are price sensitive. We have we like variety. And we are, again, it's not just price, we are actually value driven is right, I think the right term.
Right.
But beyond that, like, what was some insights that you were like, hey, I didn't know people behave like this, or you know, something of that sort.
One of our earliest hypothesis was that, when you go into tier 2, tier 3 markets, language is an important thing, because if I don't understand the interface, I can't really use the product, right? And Flipkart had seen a lot of success with vernacular, and there was a pressing thesis that, we should also do it. But counterintuitively, what we observed was, language has a status symbol attached to it, right? And especially when you think about fashion as a category, right? There's a distinction between fashion and clothing, right? Clothing is functional in nature, right? It's used to cover my body. Fashion is used to sell a status, an aspiration. It's communicating who I am, what I do, right? And from that lens, when you put that status symbol attached with it, the way people perceive products become very different. So if you're to go to buying, let's say, a product which is presented as a fashionable premium product, and then you're going to suddenly introduce the element of, let's say, regionalization, people look at it like, dude, this suddenly doesn't seem premium anymore. So that was very interesting. We're still divided in our opinions about it. But I felt very strongly that, this audience is not as what I would call as non-understanding as English. There is a big part of tier 2, tier 3 markets by virtue of using Instagram, YouTube, who have become English conversant. They're capable of understanding. May not be the most fluent, right? Maybe they might be able to speak as well as us, but it does not mean they don't understand English. It does not mean they can make sense of it, right? And they seek status in English, right? So therefore, how language plays a role in putting your product also makes a difference. That was one very interesting insight. The second one was, again, because we're talking about tier 2, tier 3 India, there's this notion that, vernacular search or therefore voice search becomes important because people may not be able to use interfaces. Interestingly, a part of that is true, but what we realize is there's this new behavior that's leapfrogging in terms of people using image to search, because it's very fashion specific. Because for any other product, it's easy to describe, right? When I talk about a blue shirt, or let me talk about this very shirt, I can describe this as black shirt with pink flowers. And there is bound to be many variations of it. Versus if I'm actually looking for a style which is exactly the same, it's easier to actually just take an image and search. And we've seen this as an interesting behavior even on, say, Instagram or YouTube, because what we see is a lot of influencers or, upcoming content creators. They start looking at celebrities. They take snapshots of it and say, you know what, Salman Khan is wearing this shirt and this pant. You can actually go to Myntra and get this exact same shirt for 700 rupees. People are looking for a like-to-like or similar, what I call as variations of it. So people are using the visual medium to discover a lot more efficient. So it then becomes important that, sure, there could be certain truths which are manifesting at a larger macro level, but it becomes important to identify what are behaviors which are specific to your industry as well, right? So for fashion is inherently visual. There is no better way to describe a shirt except by looking at it. So image then becomes primordial, which is why catalog shoots, catalog descriptions, etc. become very, very critical. So these were probably two very interesting, counterintuitive and opposing camp creating views that got generated during my time at Myntra.
And how did you discover them? That's the more interesting thing, right? That's as a growth leader, you're trying to find ways to discover such insights, right? So how did you discover these?
So, function of two things, right? When we think about trying to understand consumer behavior, we try to have multiple sources of truths coming towards us so that there is no bias per se created in any one particular channel. So the way we choose to observe is, look at media, right? There's a lot of learning that can come in from media. So we look at how people behave on YouTube or Instagram. That's a great way to observe behavior at scale. You then also want to observe how people discover. So we never go around to customers saying, how do you use my product? Do you like my feature? We just have very open-ended conversations saying, how do you discover products? What do you do to find out fashionable products, etc.? And we never try to put it about Myntra saying, we want to discover insights for Myntra. We try to make it in such a way that we're just curious about who you are as an individual. Walk us through your life. How do you shop with your friends? And here we try to have very long conversations. And somewhere on the line, they start dropping very interesting tidbits. Just like how we're having this conversation, you're picking up, cues. You need to have these kind of long conversations. And along the way, a few set of people will start dropping these, behavioral attributes. Sometimes we ask people to use products, again, with no particular agenda in mind, saying, you know what, just shop. Let's just observe how you shop, right? We're not going to ask you to say, go shop for a sari, etc. Because then there is an agenda attached to it. So the more open-ended we have these kind of conversations, and we try to make sure that, every product manager, as much as possible, every designer, within, the time capacity they have, go out, have conversation with your friends, family, non-friends, just catch a random bunch of people who are shopping inside a Zara, just have conversations with them and try to collate as much as data points as possible and start seeing if there are patterns that emerge from it and see if there are interesting hypotheses. And I think good product management also requires intuition. So then we start trying your intuition with what you're observing in the market and what you're seeing with what customers are actually talking and saying. And then say, okay, is this a strong enough hypothesis? And then can you put out a product out there and see, does that product bite? If it bites, then you know that you have something going on. And if the product bites and catches fire really quick, then you know you have a lot of conviction. A very counterintuitive learning that we have, again, in a similar way, where despite doing a lot of observation, we realized that it's just not working, was live commerce, right? Everyone said live commerce is the next big thing. Counterintuitively, we realized that it's not that live commerce is not doable, but the very foundational tenets of what makes live commerce work, nobody questioned that. Everyone said, China made it worked. India has very similar demographics. And in fact, we put a massive team behind live commerce. And even before we validated some truths, we built massive infrastructure. So we built our own live streaming capabilities. We built a lot of infrastructure products, grounds up, saying that, third-party solutions won't work for us. But not once did we actually validate, do we have the right premise for it? Are we even asking the right questions? So for example, when they say in China that live commerce contributes to a massive amount of GMV, what else was being done along with it? It was done along with key influencers. It was also done with a lot of discounts. So the question is, if you remove discounts, is it going to be as effective? Also, what is the nature of products being sold? Is it one that is being amplified by live commerce or is it being diminished by live commerce? Also, is there any other principles at play? For example, is scarcity making it sell better? Or if there was, let's say, abundance of that product, will it have as much as efficiency? Likewise, if the influencer was replaced by someone who is not as famous, would it work? So there are all of these dimensions that we didn't question. So we just believed that if we did it, it would work. It did, but it worked at an incredible and exorbitant amount of cost, and we're not getting the right kind of ROI. So that's when we said, let's relook at the first principles of it and try and understand what is live commerce, what works and what doesn't work. And then we realized that, hey, for the kind of ambitions that we have and the kind of growth that we're looking at, we may need to relook at live commerce as more as a branding play to say, anytime a brand wants to launch into the market, we have a medium to have high engaged conversations with the customers. Or if, let's say, we want to use it during a sale period as an engagement channel to sell certain categories, it works really well. But for the vast majority of BAU, there are way more effective channels simply from an ROI perspective, because for the amount of discounts that you have to give, for the money that you need to pay to the influencer, just not the right kind of economics to work out. Maybe someday in the future, somebody else will uncover certain ground truths. But these were certain contrarian truths that we learned the hard way. And hence, again, going back to thinking about growth, we say, and that actually strengthened our belief to say, next time around, don't go about building platform capabilities, grand vision, this is how the world is going to be. We don't know. And especially when you look at media and the stories that come out of media, there's a lot of reasons why people put stories out in the media. Maybe it's to attract investors, maybe it's to sell the story, but you don't know the inside story. So maybe we may want to take it with a pinch of salt and always try to build really, really piecemeal products. Just put it out there, test it out really quickly, learn if it works with the audience. And if it works, then go out and scale the product out. So live commerce didn't work. Image search worked better than voice search for us. So yeah, these were some very interesting learnings that came. Again, like I said, language. There is a premiumization attached to English as a language, and that sells status a lot better. It sells trust better. So some very counterintuitive learnings.
So then what works for us? Is French the...
No, I think we've already found English as the gold standard, right?
Yeah.
So I think for us, we need to find out newer symbols of status, right? For example, today's Gen Z is all about having the most stylish version of clothes available at very, very cheap price points, right? And as much as there's a lot of stories out there saying, they care about sustainability, ultimately sustainability versus looking cool, coolness matters a lot more. So yes, the question then matters, okay, is there a way in which you can make ultra fast fashion supremely sustainable? Because at some point it is pretty destructive, whether you like it or not. There's a ton of waste being generated. And I think that's probably where there's an opportunity, where you can find out sustainable business models for Gen Z, where you can allow them to be super stylish, super fashionable, and yet not be, destructive to the planet. Or maybe not, I don't know. But yeah, Gen Z, I count us as Gen Z as well, hopefully. I think we all seek to be ultra stylish. I think we all want to have this latest sense of style. There's definitely going to be the outliers who are going to say, I'm very happy with my gray t-shirt, blue jeans, white shirt.
Did you just describe me right now?
Not necessarily. I hope not. But I do see a vast majority of Gen Z really loving to have, a lot of variety and at ultra cheap price points. And I think that's been established. Now, is there any newer insights beyond that? Not that I've identified yet. But maybe my discovery or my journey in this startup world will help me find such.
We spoke about growth. We spoke about your team. I think we started with your team, right? An awesome team, solving a really interesting problem. We spoke about how it's not clothing, but fashion.
Right.
Talk to me about the management style. Talk to me about the leadership. How are they looking at Myntra? How do they look at the whole industry? What's happening in the marketplace of all of it? Of course, you have athletic leisure sort of brands. You have Decathlon and all the other brands that are out there. Then you have fast fashion happening. Where was Myntra? What were they really after, or what are they really after right now?
I think what they were after, what they are after, and what they will be after is the same vision statement, right? We want to be the platform for democratizing fashion and using technology as the primary means. And today, I think everyone is gearing up to the same markets, right? Everyone sees the opportunities in tier 2, tier 3 markets. Everyone is seeing growth in Gen Z, and everyone is seeing growth in beauty, which is why you also see, if I'm not wrong, Reliance coming up with its own BPC play, which is Tiara, if I'm not wrong. And then you have Nykaa playing strongly than the beauty segment. The question then becomes the strategy, which I can't obviously reveal, which is not right. But the focus is going to be on essentially everyone going after the same markets, right? It's BPC, it's Gen Z, and it's going to be tier 2, tier 3 markets. Now, the play within that, I think, like I said, it's confidential, can't be shared out loud. And how they play the game is going to be different. And also the culture, the processes, and how technology is going to be used to play those games. That's where I think the differentiation factor is going to be.
Talk to me about this. You said, hey man, I joined this because of scale. I was trying to deconstruct scale and acquire it as a skill set.
Yeah.
You planning to be there for 3 months, 6 months? You were there for about 2.5.
No, I didn't plan to be for that 3 or 6 months. People made a bet that I could be there for 3 or 6 months.
Yeah, what was it? How do you deconstruct scale? What were your insights on learning? And that's something really good, right? Because a lot of folks are looking at growth as a way to just, get scale in their company.
Right.
Be it around acquisition, be it around, user retention. What were your learnings? Hyperscale, how are they doing it? What are your learnings? If you're going to start something soon, how will you look at scale when the right time happens?
Right. See, again, ultimately, when we talk about scale, it's talk about enormous volumes, enormous revenues, and growth is the engine which allows you to get to that scale, right? I think I'll talk about the questions that I asked myself, right? What were the frameworks or structural questions that they asked to even reach that kind of scale? What allowed them to get there? And I think it's been a smart play of picking the right categories at the right time, right? So I think when you think about scaling organizations, you can't attack all categories on day one. You need to be very judicious in picking the right categories, right? So the choice of category allows you to reach the right kind of scale at the right time. So category becomes a very important problem statement. The second is also in terms of pick a category and pick the right kind of users to chase after as well, right? If you don't pick the right kind of audiences who have, let's say, the right kind of disposable income, the right kind of, let's say, technological familiarity, you're bound to hit roadblocks. You're not going to grow as fast as you'd like. So it becomes really, really important that you know how to pick the right kind of audience. Third, from a scale perspective, and probably what Myntra has done phenomenally well, which I think every company can learn from, is the art of brand building, right? I don't think anyone has built brand salience and recognition as well as Myntra has done. And when you think about brand, you will not see the returns immediately. It takes a lot of time and effort to, say, top of mind. When you think fashion, it equals to Myntra. Just like, for example, when you say Thanda matlab Coca-Cola, right? Have a break, have a Kit Kat. When you think about fashion, you want to think of Myntra, right? And that happens by putting the right kind of experience out there to the customer, right? In terms of your category selection and how you deal with the experience of the category, right? I think if I'm not wrong, there was a ton of experiences that we focused on in terms of how do we manage returns, etc. Right? For example, fashion is one of those categories where
high returns.
It has high returns because in the offline world, you can go try out a product and you can see whether it styles and fits. But in the online world, it's almost difficult. So we've trained the behavior which allows for customers to, buy as many categories or as many products as they like, take it home, try it on, and then return it. But then you have to build that entire infrastructure which allows it to happen in a very seamless fashion and needs to work for three stakeholders. It has to work for customers, it has to work for us as a business, it also has to work for the brands and sellers, right? Because if you're facilitating bad behavior when they have to bear the brunt of returns, it's not good for their margins as well, right? So how do you then manage that ecosystem? And unless you get that solved really, really well, you can't scale because brand helps in building awareness, right? Having the right categories allows you to penetrate into the market, right? Picking the right customers also to allow you to penetrate. But what allows the staying power is the real experiences, right? Discovering those products, buying those products, using it, and finding it trustworthy enough to come back for the second, third, and fourth purchase. Because that's where the bulk of growth comes in, right? So technically, right, if you look at any company, most of your revenue or your retained growth or compounding growth comes from your sticky customers.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the experiences that you frame for those experiences is what allows that compounding happen. So one of the things that we keep selling inside the organization as well is when you talk about products, it's not the app that we're selling. It's a part of the experience. But what really matters to the customer is, am I getting the right cloth that I ordered? Does it fit me well? Is it value for money? And do I see value in it? Like, for example, when I go to a party, people are going to say, oh, wow, that looks really great on you. I associate all of that back to Myntra at the end of the day. And unless that value chain is solved for, you cannot build systems for growth. And that's why I felt that, the management at Myntra then, now, and in the future, at least they've got a very strong grasp understanding of these foundational principles of fashion. And that's why we keep repeating, right? We're not a clothing company. We're not selling functional. We're selling emotions. We're selling experiences. And therefore, it matters that we look at the value chain top to bottom, right from the ad that you see on, let's say, Facebook or Google, to the point where the guy comes and delivers the product, to the time you try it, and the experience you have thereafter, until it goes back to your wardrobe and you keep it for a couple of tries after that. That's when you know that true value has been delivered. And then you come back and make a second product, and you're like, okay, you've understood the true value of Myntra, right? And that cycle time optimization essentially allows Myntra to build the right kind of thought processes and frameworks to attack growth very, very systematically.
And yet you've experienced scale before, right, Deepak? Like, look at
scale of a different order, right? See, let's put it this way. The scale at Zynga was very different from the scale at Freecharge and the scale at Myntra. The difference is in terms of the complexity of problems that you're dealing with, right? In terms of Freecharge, it's a purely digital product, right? It's just payment transactions. Right? There's no physical, real-world challenges attached to it, right? Delivery guys, quality of products. It's a uniform product. Like, I make a transaction, it goes from buyer to sender, or it goes from bank to, a particular vendor. It's fairly streamlined. So it's easier to solve for. There, the real challenges are in terms of ensuring that, there's no fraud happening. So that's a different kind of complexity, right? How do you ensure that there's no fraudulent transactions happening? How do you ensure that people aren't gaming the system? How do you ensure that because it's money, the system is safe and secure? Different complexities of problem, right? At Zynga, the scale complexity was different. It's about virtual goods, right? And dealing with customers in different geographies using our products, right? And each of them having different expectations of the game, how the game should function, and how do you make digital products work at scale, making sure they're cost effective, etc. Here, it's physical products. We have a digital component as well, but the real value comes in shipping clothes, right? And the challenges associated with it, right? So how do I sell a physical project digitally online? How do I represent the shirt online? What about it will make the shirt look trustworthy? How do I make someone trust my brand? How do I help them understand that returns is actually going to work in your favor? How do I know as a business that it's the same shirt that I actually sent you that is coming back? How do I know that, I can put some damage control if, let's say, you've used it 3 times and coming back? How can I test it out? We have different sellers, different vendors. How do I ensure that the same size is coming in every batch, right? For example, we've seen cases where, there can be minor variations in shoe sizes, which can make quality challenges for the customers at the end of the day, right? So what kind of checks and balances do I put there, right? So this is what I would call as, again, different businesses bring in different kinds of scale complexity. Maybe at a numbers point of view, they all look the same, but the nuances of the business make the scale complexity a lot more different. And a lot more difficult. And I'd say off the lot, I'd say Myntra is probably the hardest business to be in, right? Physical businesses, real world businesses are incredibly complex. From that lens, Freecharge today seems a lot easier. Zynga seems a lot easier, but Myntra probably is the most challenging of the lot that I've had to deal with. And that brought a rich amount of learnings, right? To deal with physical world complexities. Quite the experience.
And does that is that the reason you went for it? Because you had experienced scale and this was a different scale. Right. And yet you were like, hey man, I wanted to experience a sort of scale in Myntra. So is it again coming back to the same, I would say there's this part of you that wants hardware designed products and that's something that you want to do eventually. So it's like, hey, this will make sense because I want to kind of understand this so that
it was more from the nature of complexity, right? I think amongst the most challenging businesses to run are e-commerce, right? As opposed to pure play digital business. It's not to discount that digital businesses aren't easy. Physical businesses have that slight edge of real world things that are slightly out of your control all the time. Yeah. So I wanted to put myself into that kind of an ecosystem, and that happening at scale for the whole of India was something I wanted to see. Even Freecharge at the end of the day, right? If I was to compare it in magnitude to Flipkart, it's a lot smaller, right? While we were at scale, it was still a lot lesser in scale, right? So I wanted to see what it is to build products for the whole of India, right? And also to deal with complexities of the nature that the Flipkart group or the Myntra group dealt with. And that brought in a lot of rich learnings. And also to see how is it possible to have built a sustainable business which has reached this scale after so many years and still has staying power, right? A lot of companies have come into existence, have become unicorns and have disappeared overnight. These companies have persisted and they are still doing a great job and putting a lot of players under pressure. So there's definitely something that they've done really, really well. So I wanted to understand those nuances, which is where, how you pick those categories, building that brand, building the right kind of moats to stick in those businesses added a lot of value to my learnings. And that's what I carry forward when I think about my new ventures as well.
You spoke about Recharge. That's a different beast. And you were at a very interesting time as well, right? How did that happen?
So Freecharge happened because I had this itch to start a payment startup. And however, I wasn't ready to start one of my own because I felt that I wanted to deploy the skills that I'd learned to see, hey, have I really got it under wraps? So I was probably a little risk averse at that point of time, but I felt better to take risk with someone who's already started the journey than to start it off by myself.
Yeah.
And the way it started was I had a bunch of friends who I was staying with, and they had just joined Freecharge from Redbus. And they're talking, there's a really cool company called Freecharge we're working for, and they're like killing it. We're going to kill the payment space. And I saw an ad of theirs, and I was like, why are we, for a digital company, why are you spending money on ads? There has to be better ways of growing. So I was very curious about that. So I went and met Kunal and met Alok, who had just joined in from Redbuzz. And I put in a couple of ideas into how to think about growth. They said, cool, so how do you think we should do a bit? So I said, how about you allow me to look at some of your numbers? So I actually worked with one of the head of analysts there, got a couple of numbers from them, did an analysis, did that for about a couple of weeks and went back to them and presented on, hey, here's how I think we should be doing growth. To which they said, if that's the case, why don't you come join on board? So that's how it happened. I just felt that like ads are good, but there could be better ways of growing it. So I joined the growth team at Myntra. Not that I was one. It was a one-man team. And slowly started taking on product as well. So I worked on both sides, both on the growth and product. So that's how the FreeCharge story happened. Purely by wanting to build my own payments company, but not having the confidence yet to solve it by myself. So I thought, join one team who's ambitious, courageous, and also some of my closest friends were there. So it's like, hey, what better than to start be a part of a company where your really close friends are part of.
Yeah.
So at least it's going to be a fun ride. So checked all the boxes. That's how the FreeCharge story happened.
And what was though? Like what did you discover around like, okay, if ad doesn't work, or I mean, doesn't work, it works to grow a company, but what are some other levers around growth that you're like, hey, maybe we could look into that?
So, I mean, when I said ads don't work, I said TV ads, probably I should specify that. I saw TV ads. So I felt that, TV ads probably not the most effective because there's a huge friction between discovery and payments. And at least my initial thesis was, performance marketing would be a much better way. And we didn't have performance marketing back in the day. So I said, I'll do performance marketing. So started running ads on Facebook and Google and found out a couple of hacks. Right. Back in the day, we could get installs for sub 10 rupees and, have a very efficient funnel. So the goal was to say that, recharge is one of those categories where, especially prepaid, that was the thesis as well. We said, there's a broad market, prepaid and postpaid. Who do we focus? We said prepaid because that's where most of the market is. And then even in prepaid, the conviction was to say, let's focus on the 3G market and not the 2G market because eventually the market is going to go there. So while everybody else is saying the mass market is 2G, we'll focus on 3G so that we build the best 3G kind of experiences. And from there, as the market scales, we'll also grow alongside with them. So if that's the case, then what is a good experience? In prepaid, at least the behavior that I'd observed was you can top up without having to wait for it, right? For example, if I have like 350 rupees top up, I can do yet another top up and it accumulates. So it practically allows you to target anyone who's a prepaid customer, right? And we said, what is a magical experience? And I think at that point of time, we all discussed that recharge should be a one-click experience, right? It shouldn't be one where people have to sit, think, etc. So the minute I download the app, I open the app, I should know exactly what to recharge for. Right? So the question is, could we identify who the operator was? And if the goal was to deliver value, sure, you could purchase the most ideal top-up, or we say, why don't you just try our product out and just click a button and make that recharge happen so you get to see what that experience was like. And that combined with the digital advertising experience could seem like a magical funnel. So you see an ad, it says fastest recharge experience, get most value. You download the ad and we say, there's $10 money that just is in your wallet preloaded. You press a button and recharge happens. That should grow. And that insight came because when we were looking at the funnel, we realized that most of the weakness in the funnel was happening at the bottom of the funnel. The payments weren't happening really well because at that point of time, customers were recharging through State Bank of India or through some banks or certain debit cards, which didn't have the best payment success rates. And if we're losing bottom of the funnel users, and I'm spending money at top of the funnel, it's just inefficient. So how about we just put 10 rupees into that wallet and say on Google Play Store saying 10 rupees in your wallet, optimize for SEO, do a bunch of ads which says, there's already money in your wallet, just come download the ad, click a button, do your recharge. It should be like, you should get the recharge experience in under 10 seconds. And that kind of just unlocked massive growth for us, right? So we then came up with an internal phrase called release the Kraken. And we use that for a wide variety of use cases. You want to stress this infrastructure, we'd say, release the Kraken, which is to put out a bunch of quick offers, really small value offers, but good enough to get users on board at scale. And that would stress test our infrastructure, right? You want to spike up growth really fast again. We found out a bunch of communities in which we can float the right kind of promo codes at really small denominations, which allow people to trial our product really, really quickly. And then we also then use the same insight to design a referral program. So all of that allowed us to, create this really crazy growth engine. And yeah, that was the FreeCharge story, man. I think when I joined FreeCharge, we were probably clocking around 10,000 transactions a day. And I think when we got acquired, we were close to about 1 million transactions a day. All of this in a span of 18 months. So that was like a truly, truly rocket ship growth for us.
पैसा कमाया क्या?
I think all of us made reasonable money. I think when we got acquired, it was India's largest acquisition story ever, right? $500 million. So it would be fair to say that all stakeholders got the return on investment.
Yeah.
I can't comment beyond that because I don't know the details beyond that.
I'm only talking about you because here's what I observed, right? After FreeCharge, you suddenly became an investor. So I was like, hey, there is some sort of signaling happening here.
No, I should discover so much
this.
of a signaling as much as me wanting to experiment with the notion of investing. It's probably the only angel investment I've ever done. Also, if you look into what I've done, right? I think all of us made reasonably good returns, enough to lead a reasonably good lifestyle. And I think it also set a precedent because I think if you had seen the media stories just probably a couple of years ago, right, there were a ton of startups that probably did its exit and none of the team members ever made bank on it, right? Maybe the VCs did, maybe the founders did, but the teams were never honored. And this was about the time where I think Kunal Shah had that, and he still has that mindset, right? He says that the team has done the hard work and they deserve to be rewarded. And that made a big precedent to change the narrative, to say you can trust startups to work with founders, and founders are not all evil. There are genuinely good founders out there who reward their teams when they do great work. And that changed the narrative. And I think that made a big impact for every other subsequent startup that came in as well. Because until that point of time, people are like, why should I go join a startup? Because clearly when success happens, it's only the founders and VCs that take away the money. Yeah. What's in it for me? And that's why I think there was this negative backlash for ESOPs. Why should I trust eShops, etc.? Yeah. I think this was one of those pivotal stories that changed that narrative. But I also remember Alok Goel, who came and told us, it's very fortunate that we got such an exit. Do not let this ever get to your head. Yeah. Do not ever let this get to your head. Stay humble for the rest of your life because it takes a lot of, takes many things to come together for this kind of an exit to happen. Yeah. And many players, many individuals. So it's not just you alone, it's everybody put together. So never let this success get to you. If you leverage this capital for meaningful things, I think there's a lot of value you can create in the future. And I took that personally to heart as well, saying that, I'm going to use this capital to allow me to also someday in the future build the right kind of foundation. Yeah. And it gave me the ability to experiment with the kind of startups that I wanted to do. One such experiment was also where I believed in a team and I thought, hey, let me try my hand at investing. And that was it. That was that one angel investing that I did. So I never became an investor. It was just an experiment in understanding what it feels to be on the other side of the table. Yeah. And to learn, how do you evaluate a startup? How do you look at a team? And it also happened to be a friend's startup, and I knew him really well. So I had the conviction that they would go on and do something great. And for me to learn, like I said, from the other side of the table, what does an investor think and look like? And do I have the patience? Right? It's very easy to sit and say, boss, put in the money, you'll get returns. Yeah. But when you see so much of tumultuousness, do you have the courage to stick through? I was at some point, maybe I should ask my money back, like, hey, hold on. This is a very tiny sum, nothing great. But do I have the conviction to see this through until they reach a reasonable state? So it allowed me to learn a little bit of patience as well. And today they're doing phenomenally well. So I'm really, really happy and proud of them. I also learned a lot from them in that journey. So that was my brief one shot at investment, and that's it. Never done anything after that.
I think, what's interesting to know here would be the ESOP journey. Like,
right.
What are some learnings around that? Because a lot of time there are negative stories out there.
Right.
This is an interesting positive story. So what are your learnings? Like, if somebody is now going in 2023 when we are recording this, somebody going out there, starting joining a company, how does that look like? What should they be looking at in terms of ESOPs? How do they evaluate it? What are your learnings there? Like, if you were to guide someone, a younger Deepak, a decade back, how would they look at ESOPs?
See, ESOP is a way of wealth creation, right? And I would say I see this even with the Flipkart group. I'm pretty sure you ever heard the news, right? In terms of the recent, phone pay spin-off and therefore the ESOPs resulting in cashbacks for the employees, right? Ultimately, everyone is looking for some form of wealth creation, right? It's a strong motivational force. And I don't think anyone is out there creating value for charity, right? You want to be able to pay your bills, you want to lead a reasonably good life, and you want to be rewarded for the risk that you take, right? And for a lot of startups in the early days, you don't have access to capital, which is why you choose to give people ESOPs, so that you can say that, in the future, should things do really, really well, the payout will be great, right? So from that sense, ESOP is an incredibly powerful wealth creation tool. So I do subscribe to the theory of ESOPs, and I do think all startups should promote ESOPs. The only challenge is the ability to honor it. And the second is, how do you pick the right startups? So it's not so much of ESOPs anymore as much as to how do you know which is the right company to take a bet on? And that's the harder part, right? There are a dime a dozen startups out there. And how do you know who's the right founder to take a bet on?
Yeah.
And what is the right industry? And I would say, more than the industry, probably it matters on how you are able to pick the right founder. To me, I was very fortunate because one, I think during the very early stages of the conversation, I was able to get a sense of who the founding team was. I got a sense of how Kunal Shah thought. I got a sense of how Alok Goel thought. And that kind of gave me the conviction that, these are people you can trust. That matters a lot, right? If you somewhere feel that the founders or the founding team cannot be trusted, no amount of ESOP, no matter how lucrative it sounds, will work, because somewhere deep inside your gut is going to be like, if things go topsy-turvy, or, if things go well, am I going to get my fair share out of it, right? If you go into an organization with such a mindset, it's never going to work. So I would say, more than be too worried about the ESOP, focus more on who the founder is and get a good read on the founders and the founding team. Get a good read from the market in terms of, hey, how has this person been over a period of time? Do you think this is the kind of person who honors their word? Is this the kind of person who you can trust? Is this the kind of person who's going to have your back in hard situations? Do you think this person is out there to just sell the company at any cost, or are they truly trying to create something of value and in that process give you something back? Like, these are hard questions that you have to ask, and that is what determines the efficacy of an ESOP. ESOP by in itself it's just like money, right? Yeah. It's a belief. I believe that you will pay me something back.
I'm not paying anything.
Right?
But you're doing this for free, right?
Yes, absolutely. Right? And for this cup of tea. But if that belief in itself did not exist, then that ESOP is just paper, right? So it really, really boils down to identifying, I think, founders' ideologies. And if you don't spend enough time identifying the founders' ideology or the founding team's ideology, more often than not, you will start seeing that the ESOP is practically worthless.
So how was it? Like, how was the Kunal back then? Alok, how were they?
So I'd say Kunal and Alok are diametrically opposite people, right? Yeah. Kunal is epitome of hustling and let's just do it, let's figure it out. Alok is the more pragmatic. So it brings in that right balance of be crazy and being pragmatic and risk averse for the right reason. I think good leadership should be ambitious and yet know how to balance risk. If you have no concept of risk, then you're bound to make a lot of terrible mistakes, right? And also, if you're not ambitious enough, you're never going to be able to push yourself out of the comfort zone. So I was lucky to be between these two leaders from whom I've learned a lot, right? So Kunal would just say, you know what, just go and think of a crazy number, man. Let's just achieve it. And I'd be like, you know what, that's not crazy enough. How about we double this number? He says, yes, let's do that, right? So I still think he's of the same personality. And the second thing about Kunal is he was incredibly hands-off. He'd say, I trust you, figure it out, right? I've hired you, I trust you. And if you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, or I may have a couple of hypotheses that I may want to validate. But beyond that, I've entrusted you, so you need to figure out how we're going to get there. I'm not going to step in too often to figure things out alongside with you. And the third part was, I think, he encouraged a lot of healthy debates, right? I would remember, I would challenge him. He would say, hey, I have this hypothesis. I'd say, no, Kunal, I don't think that's the right hypothesis. I think this way. And we'd say, you know what, let's put this to test. Let's quickly roll this out in the next 24 hours and see what happens. And the best part was, after we would do such a test, he would say, oh, I didn't quite expect that. Cool, this is new learning. Great. Continue. Right? So it was never a case where, I'm right, you're wrong. I have this very strong conviction, let's do this. It's like, all of these are hypotheses. Let's quickly put it out to test. I need to trust you as well if you're going to move things fast. And a lot of hands-off way of execution. So I think that was really great. Alok, on the other hand, was very pragmatic. He was like, have you thought about this? What is the structure towards approaching this problem? So it was a lot of methodicalness. So I think I've learned to be both that, ambitious, wild, let's just do it kind of thing from Kunal, but also, hey, make sure there's a little of pragmatism and practicality and ensure that, you're having your eyes and ears in all directions to ensure that you're not jumping off a cliff without anything, right? So there's this entire startup phrase, right, which I think Paul Graham or I think Reid Hoffman says, a startup is something that you jump off the cliff and you assemble. But when you jump off, do you have the materials to assemble? You just can't jump and hope that from thin air you can assemble something, right? So do you have the right kind of backup? Do you have the right kind of understanding to ensure that you have some kind of a reasonable landing? But if all things go well, you're able to take incredibly large bets and make an impact as well. So I got to see both those dimensions. And I think very few people get to see such kind of leadership plays. And I think it takes a lot for a founder also to take a step back and say, I'm going to let someone to come in and be the CEO. Usually founders say, I have to be the CEO. So it takes a lot of humility and humbleness to allow someone external to come in and trust them and allow them to lead the organization and also add in value where you can to lead the organization. So that was beautiful. A lot of rich learnings there for me.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's also, you've been, I don't want to use the word lucky, but, being able to really be at the right place at the right time a bunch of times, actually. Right? And
all right. Okay.
Not this place included.
Sure.
but how does that work? Like free charge, was that by design, as in like, hey, I want to figure out fintech and work with Kunal, and again he had a name even back then, not as much, like not as big as it is now. But was it like, okay, let me figure that out, and then again from there to Myntra? How does one really, like, if somebody's listening to this, like they say, I would like to do this, right? So
okay,
what does one do? Or like, hey man, give it a shot, like just shoot your shot sort of thing, and then
So when you say lucky, what does it really mean?
I think like also it's like very interesting, right? Podcasts are very interesting because we're crafting narratives of past. Like that's the beauty of it, right? So and hence it looks beautiful, right? It's almost like fashion, as you said.
Okay.
Right? Like you're crafting beautiful stories. But the thing is, when you're in it, probably you don't feel like it is. Like for me, what luck is, like, you're able to optimize for again, like could be monetary, could be, access to insights. Like for you, definitely Myntra was like a place where you were like, hey, I want to figure out access of insights around scale. There are some hypotheses around growth, which I want to kind of check if they work in the e-com space. So how does that look like? How do you kind of do that? As you said, right, there's so many startups out there. Everybody's trying to optimize. Like luck, I would say, is like, a function of, or a factor where you're trying to optimize for whatever you're after, right? It could be like, a career, and especially here we are talking about a growth career or a career as such, as a marketeer or anything of that sort. So then how does one look at that?
So again, if you look at it, right, again, you said, I got some insights, I got some economic outcome, etc., right? Ultimately, what you're looking at is when you say someone is lucky, It is an individual's perspective of the outcome, right? If I didn't have that outcome, you wouldn't call me lucky, right? If let's say Recharge didn't have the outcome it did, and I didn't get that outcome, you would say, dude, you're unlucky, right? Likewise, for some reason, I joined a company and it failed.
And there was no idea to know before, right?
So that's where I feel that, see, one is the perspective part of it, right? So it's how you look at it. But if I was to structurally break down this theory of luck, right? Essentially, what we're saying is a perspective, whether self or an external person's view of my outcomes. And therefore, if you then take a step back and ask, what generates outcomes, right? That has to be input.
That's a nice question. Yeah.
Right? So unless there is input, there is no outcomes, right? And this is where I think I probably draw parallels to how I look at the world of experimentation, which is very primordial to the philosophy of growth, right? In order for you to get outcomes, first and foremost, you have to have a lot of input because there are many unknowns. So the more often you put something out there, you get to get feedback, right? To know what works and what doesn't work. So therefore, outcome can be probably said as a function of the number of times you try something out. And then the second part of it is, are you collecting that feedback and seeing if you're able to generate any insight or patterns, right? Once you're able to generate those patterns, you're probably going to know where the direction is headed a lot better. So it's a function of probability, right? If you know you've tried 10 things and you see that 5 out of 10 times or 6 out of 10 times direction A is better than direction B, probabilistically, it is better to go down direction A than B, right? But if you've only done once, there is absolutely no way to know this truth, right? Likewise, if you did not collect this feedback and see this pattern, nor can you make that judgment. Again, if you notice, there is no 100% in this. It's a case of probabilities. So probabilistically, are you headed down the right direction? And the only way to take that probabilistic direction is the ability to derive patterns. The only way to derive patterns is to do it more often. And I think this is probably the most effective way to get outcomes in your favor, right? So more inputs, more feedback, and more course corrections, inevitably over a period of time, allows you to align yourself in the most highly probable directions of success, right? Now, it's still not guaranteed. It's only increasing the odds of probability. Therein comes the ability, especially the pattern seeking part is pretty important, right? How do you know what is signal and noise in terms of feedback, right? How do you know which insight to use versus which signal to discard, right? So for example, when I joined Freecharge, a couple of key things that I had high confidence in, right? And this dates back to the point where I was a child and I had seen technology evolve. I had seen how technology had gone from being a laptop to a desktop. So in fact, the very first computer that I saw was not even a desktop, it was actually a laptop, right? My dad was in the oil and gas business and he used to carry around this enormously giant machine, which was not even, it wasn't a color computer. It was, it was those orange backlit computers.
Okay.
And I was fascinated. And from then I'd seen, that becoming to this beautiful color display and then that being connected to the, the internet and that then coming back in the form factor of a laptop, which was portable. So I had seen the evolution of technology and I then seen the mobile phone. So I had that very strong conviction that sooner or later, the form factor, the price, all of that is going to drop and mobiles are going to be ubiquitous. Second, I had seen the magic of the internet. I had probably got exposed to the internet when there were browsers like Ask Jeeves, Mozilla, and all of those kind of things, right? And I had seen how magical the internet is. I only felt it was a matter of time that mobile was going to come onto the phone. And I knew that, at least, if you look back, the mobile payment revolution didn't start in India as well, right? I think back in the day, there was M-Pesa in Africa, where you could do mobile payments as well. So I felt that, there could be better mobile payments that eventually come to this country. Now seems to be the right time because smartphones were taking off. Everyone I knew around me had a smartphone. Everyone had at least a 2G, 3G connection. So it only felt inevitable that sometime in the distant future, this will happen. And if I don't get onto this wave now, it's never going to work, right? if the mobile was not there, if the internet was not there, I probably wouldn't have taken that. But because mobile was there, because internet was there, and the phones were getting cheaper, and the cost of internet was cheaper. I recall the very first time I had seen the price of internet in India, it was outrageously expensive.
Yeah.
So when I put that into perspective, I'm like, yeah, 5 to 10 years definitely it's going to come down. And anyway, startup is a 5 to 10 year game. So I'm fairly confident that this will play out. It only now boils down to us executing. So then what gave me the confidence on execution? Then I looked around, like, who are the people I'm joining forces with? Well, joining forces with a bunch of product folks that I really love and they're really smart. Second, there's Alok Goel coming in from Google and was taken Redbus to success. So a very smart product leader coming in. And then there's folks like Harish who are like really good at design and all that. So it's like, it seems like the right bunch of smart people, right? If we screw it up, it's only because we're screwing it up and not because of the market. So the conditions seem right. We have the right sort of people, and we seem to have reasonable bank in the money. And I'd heard of Sequoia. I knew that, Sequoia coming in. I was like, wow, okay. So there's a lot of signaling that is going on. But the strongest signals were technology and the people. I knew that this was inevitable. So I felt that even if, let's say, Sequoia funding did not happen and anyone else had put in the money, I don't think I would have been too concerned about it, right? So this is how I had narrowed in on this opportunity. And I think when I look back and I say Myntra as well, I've taken similar choices. Again, I could also then ask myself, hey, if I had such pattern-seeking abilities, I should have made better choices with my startup, right? So I think it's a case of some patterns working in your favor, some patterns not. But the more often you put yourself out there, the more often you get the feedback loop coming in as quickly as possible and you course correct. Inevitably, there is bound to be moments where you can consider yourself lucky or someone else can perceive you lucky.
It's like playing a game.
It is like playing a game at the end of the day, right? But at least in games, it is deterministic. There is no concept of luck, right? It is completely in your control. There are rules there. Like when you design a game, you don't win a game on luck. That would be Las Vegas, where there's a lot of probability attached. Yeah. But most games are not designed that way. They're designed so that over a period of time, you can master skills and game and win. Life is more probabilistic in nature. So if you get a very good understanding of probability and you're very good at developing good signal to noise frameworks, and most importantly, I think the ability to take risk, because ultimately at the end of the day, you can have all the signals looking at you, and yet you wouldn't want to take it because you're risk averse. And I think a good part of luck is also the ability to take risk. And I think the way I have learned to take risk is, I used to be a very fearful person, whether you'd like to believe it or not, right? I used to be afraid of a lot of things. And at one point I was very sick and tired of being afraid. So I said, you know what, I'm going to systematically work to overcome my fears. For example, I used to be afraid of the ocean only because I saw the movie Jaws as a kid. And after seeing that movie, I couldn't sleep alone in a room. Right? And I would be like, shit, there's a Jaws coming out. It's completely psychological. There's no way a shark is ever going to come into my room, right? But then when I used to go to the ocean, I would stand in the ocean, everyone would be having fun. I would be like, I am not coming anywhere near this thing, right? But I said, it's a shame to live life with so much fear. You're missing out on so much joy. So I asked myself, how can I re-engineer myself to get rid of fear systematically? So I said, I'm going to expose myself to small risks consistently over a period of time and build my courage and confidence. And where does fear come in from? It comes from the fear of the unknown, right? If I don't know what something is and what the outcomes are, is when fear starts to amplify. So I said, the more I understand about something, the more I immerse myself into something, the more I'm going to gain my confidence. And if I take tiny steps in that direction, I'm going to start building my confidence to overcome these fears. So I would say, building that ability to be courageous and systematically take risk also over a period of time allows you to capitalize on probabilities really, really well. Because many times, if you look at most startup ideas, most of us would look back and say, oh, damn, I also knew this. I also knew this. And most likely the person who saw it was also very smart. Very likely if they had probably spoken to a few other folks, they could have put the team together. They could have raised a bunch of capital. But why did they not choose to do it? Right? Somewhere along, mostly it's that fear that's often like, if I do this, I'm leaving the comfort of XYZ, and therefore I may. So I'm very happy being in my comfort zone. So taking quantifiable risks, I think, plays a huge part in increasing the likelihood of calling yourself lucky, or someone like you calling me lucky.
Yeah. So talk to me about Zynga. Like, tell me, like, what were you doing there? Because it was so analytical heavy. How did you start looking at it? Like, how do you look at numbers now when you do experiments? Is it always led with numbers and it has to have an hypothesis there, or you were like, hey, let me go and find out what's going to happen?
Got it. So, see, when it came to Zynga, right, it definitely was more analytical for sure. Right? And I started my career there at Zynga on a game called Empires and Ally. And usually PMs there get put into two buckets. Either you're a revenue PM or you're a growth PM. And I started off as a growth PM. And the goal was, as a growth PM, to largely engage engagement, retention, virality, etc. And for some parts of it, it does require you to truly understand numbers really well. For example, a good part of engagement is getting, just like how products have funnels, games also have funnels, wherein you have to get customers deeper into the gameplay. And it becomes important to understand, why aren't people able to move deeper into the gameplay? Is it the design? Is it because the economies of the game is not preventing them from moving forward? So we have game designers who would work with as well to understand, usually, for example, let's take the game of Empires, not that too many people recall, but it's like a game like Farmville, except set in probably in a war zone of sorts.
Okay.
And it involves the same crafting mechanism. So you have to like build a camp, acquire resources. And every task would require a certain amount of effort from the customer, right? And sometimes if the task became too hard, customers would drop off, right? If this task became too easy, you get certain resources too easy, and then it imbalances the game as well. And customers could also pay for getting certain resources. And it became then a balance between saying, how much of the free resources should be available, how much should be paid, and how do you get them so that, everyone in the ecosystem is having a fun time playing. And that really does involve going deep into the numbers to understand what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's where I learned the basic premise of, how do you structure a problem statement? And I'd recall very clearly, right? Sometimes in games, what happens, as it happens in other consumer-facing internet companies, is your metrics tank or go for a toss. And I recall my manager back then would come and say, Deepak, you have to go deeper into this. I would just do analysis number one and say, hey, this is what happened. He's like, but how do you know that's the real reason, right? How do you establish causality behind this? How can you not be sure that something else has happened? So go deeper into the numbers, see other behavioral patterns, and see if they all point in the same direction. So a lot of that rigorous feedback, I think, has helped me shape my approach towards using numbers to look at problems. But it's not the only source of identifying insights, right? So numbers can help you understand structurally how a problem looks, where is a problem, but doesn't tell you what a problem is. Sometimes you can hypothesize, you can put it out to test, but there are many things numbers don't tell you. And that's where, for example, even in Zynga, a lot of folks used to get caught up just looking at numbers. And there used to be this really beautiful community setup that we used to have where people would come and discuss about, what they play, how they play, and a lot of, casual banter. And back in the day, there was a head of products who was working out of the Bay Area who was telling us what to do. And I remember clearly the story was, they had hypothesized a certain feature, which was about building certain types of designs, walls, castles, etc., to put out in the game. And they said, we've tried it once, it's going to fail, so you shouldn't do it. And data from a priori showed that it's not going to work. But interestingly, there was a sub-community for that same game called Castleville where people were talking about Game of Thrones. This was about the time Game of Thrones actually started coming out. And people started relating the game to Game of Thrones. So they used to try to do a lot of Game of Thrones things inside Castleville. But nobody was paying attention to the community. And I just accidentally stumbled upon that insight. And I was like, we should actually build these kind of fortresses which kind of help it go parallel to Game of Thrones. Now, obviously, we can't use Game of Thrones because we're not licensed to. But we can give them a parallel experience. That received a lot of pushback. They said, this is never going to happen. And we said, let's build it and launch it. We're not going to tell them. And we did. And it turned out to be one of the top revving features. So the key here is, right, data is also a source of truth, but it's not the only source of truth. So whenever you build products, at least, I say there are multiple pathways to unlocking the truth from customers. If you have data and you have good data, use that to find the truth. If you have customer insights floating in the form of reviews, ratings, community feedback, use that. Reach out to your customers as well. Speak to them, understand them, empathize with them. Fourth, if you can't do any of this and you have just a hypothesis, just build it and put it out there. Fifth, over a period of time, you need to immerse yourself into that space and become that customer, right? There's a lot you can feel as a customer when you use your product or play it to say, you know what, if I were a customer, here's how it doesn't mean you're right. It gets you to understand a certain nuances. And then as you quickly put it out to test with the market, you learn. So use all of these sources of truth to find out what works and what doesn't work. If you just get lopsided into one, it's very, very unlikely to create great products. For example, if you over-index on only analytics, you may sometimes uncover innovative products, but you may also just get up into the trap of just optimization.
Yeah.
If you just only listen to customers, you're missing out on the optimization angle, right? If you only empathize, then you're just going down a creative pursuit and you're losing connectivity. So everything has its pros and cons, but it requires for us to use all of these parts of truths to build great products. So that is how Zynga has shaped me as an individual. A lot of good learnings, definitely from the analytics sides. But like I said, it had its own limitation, which I think I've fine-tuned over the course of the years with other methods.
Yeah. And I think we've looked at your craft of being an operator there as well. And how does that look like? Like, how is that so different? Because you've kind of floated on both sides, right?
Right.
So what does it take to be a good operator? Like we spoke about, like we started off by you know looking at you as a founder,
right?
But now as we come to the close, I want to kind of discuss on that. Like,
right.
how does that, like, how do you define a good operator? Like, how do they kind of deal with, say, ambiguity, right? Because that somehow, unfortunately,
right.
Is part of the deal nowadays,
right?
Especially in startups, like, yeah.
The way I see it, right? I may have operated as an operator, but I don't think I've ever taken off my founder's hat. So I've always put myself saying that, I'm kind of like the founder inside this company, except I'm a junior PM. So what? So if I have the founder's mindset, I ask myself, what would a founder do in this situation? So I've always believed that, when you have that kind of a mindset, you embody everything that the company and culture stands for. You become one with the company. So it's not about, am I seeking my next promotion or am I getting... You do what it takes for the company to succeed. And you have a radius of operation. You say, well, this is what has been entrusted for me as my radius of operation, and here's what I'm going to do. And if I see something that I think I can solve and nobody's solving for, let me go ahead and do it as well. So I've never truly thought of myself as an operator. I've always said, if I was the founder and I was in this role, in this position, in this designation, what would I do? That's what I do. So I never have ever thought of myself as an employee. And that's what gives me the advantage to get opportunities inside companies as well. Because essentially, all leaders are looking for people who take on the company as if it were their own, right? You want people to stretch above and beyond their call of duty. You want people to take risks. You want people to deeply care about what they do. And you want people to deal with ambiguity, right? If you're constantly looking for someone to tell you what you do, it's going to be very difficult to operate, because you have to also understand that, your manager also has enough of things to deal with on their plate, right? Their managers have enough things to deal. So how can you be that person who independently goes out and finds things to do? And so long as there's an open channel, you can go and say, here's what I'm thinking. Can you tell me quickly if I'm in the right direction or not?
Yeah.
Right? And if you have those kind of open lines, sooner or later, you will be able to find out the right ambiguity to focus on. So the first problem in itself is there's so much ambiguity. Where do I look at?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But the way to course correct is to have open lines of communication with multiple stakeholders, your manager first and foremost, your teammates. And if you're someone who's proactively connected to multiple people within an organization, for a moment forgetting that, I'm just a junior PM. Nobody's ever stopped the junior PM from going and having conversations, right? You can catch someone down the street or, coming down the water cooler and say, hey, can you stop for 2 minutes? Can I just ask you this question? I've seen you on email. I've seen you in this meeting. I just have this one doubt. Maybe on day one, you don't have enough clarity. Maybe on 6 months down the line, you don't have enough clarity. But maybe after a year, you do this persistently. Sooner or later, you're going to have a lot of context. The problem is most people expect things to be handed on a platter to them. And I think that's not a very effective way to grow. I mean, if you think of yourself wanting to be ambitious, seize the opportunity, then you need to go out there and get things for yourself, right? Even like, for example, a lot of people say, it's a manager's responsibility to coach. Yes, a part of it is, but a part of it is also your responsibility to learn by yourself. Because ultimately, let's put it this way. The reason why a company exists is to solve customers' problems, generate value for all stakeholders. And I say stakeholders, it's the employees, it's the shareholders, it is the customers, it's everyone in the ecosystem. Nowhere is it said that it is the role of the company to sit and educate us. That's why we went to college. That's why we did a lot of other things. And therefore, it's our onus as well to go out and educate ourselves. So from that lens, a founder has to do all of these things, right? When you go out and attack a problem statement, you need to go and educate yourself about that problem statement. You need to go out and figure out what is ambiguous, what is not important. You need to hustle and get things done. You don't say, hey, well, I'm a founder, but I'll have a teammate to do it. No, you need to get things done by yourself. So I think when you have that kind of a mindset as an operator, I think the rules of the games change, the opportunities change, and therefore the likelihood of success also inside organizations changes. Because at least as a manager, I look for people who do beyond what is defined for them, right? Because, for example, when I spoke about some of my teammates, right? A lot of them didn't have to do what they had to do. They could have just said, you know what, it's not part of my job description. It's not even my role right now because this is what is expected out of, let's say, a senior PM. But they did it because it's what is right for the team, it's what's right for the customers, it's what's right for the company. And when you see those kind of people, then you don't sit and try to compartmentalize. You then say, what else can I give them as an opportunity? And those are the kind of people you want to propel faster into the organization and give them more opportunities because they're just hungry to do more things and they're not categorically bound by titles, designations, roles. In fact, very surprisingly, I was reading this book by Eric Schmidt a couple of days back where he talks about Google's early days founding culture, where one day, I think if I'm not wrong, Larry Page and Sergey Brin look at the ads that come in and they just go to the cafeteria and put up a note saying, these ads suck. That's it. Someone who was not in from the ads team went, saw that, overnight solved the problem, put it out in production, said the problem is solved, it is structured and said it's done. In any other company, he says, it will require for people to sit, have a conversation, debate, discuss. Here was said that person felt it was a problem annoying enough for him to solve it. And he didn't sit and think for a moment, oh, it's that team's problem. I'm not even on their team. How is it going to add to my credentials? How is it going to add to my promotions? He just went and did it. And surprisingly, the ad team was like, hey, that's a great solution. In fact, we would kind of never thought about this as well. So we're actually very happy that you solved it. So when you have that kind of a mindset and culture where solving customers' problems matter the most, you feel you are the owner of that problem. You are responsible. You feel every other problem is also your responsibility. But you're just being mindful enough to say, okay, if I take something more than I can chew, I may not. But if I can, I should. I think those kind of players can go on to making tremendous impact in organizations. And sure, you need to be absolutely egoless. You shouldn't be sitting and thinking, is this going to guarantee my promotion? Is this going to give me my next raise? Oh, my friend has just got promoted 3 years ago and I'm still stuck here. If those are the things you're optimizing for, this mindset is going to be counterproductive because you don't know whether you're going to get the rewards for it. Yeah. But you do it because that's what's right. Yeah. So that's been my philosophy. So I don't say operate as an operator. I say operate as a founder in an operator role.
No, that makes sense. I think that also kind of answers a lot of other questions that I've been asking you. So, it's been a pleasure. I'm really, really curious to see, Deepak, what you're going to be building soon.
Likewise, I'm also curious about what I and a beautiful team will build.
What and where and what space. That'd be a very interesting space, and hoping to continue this conversation. But Deepak, thank you so much for this.
You're welcome.
We at GrowthX, and I'm super happy that we got to have this chance to talk to you. Just really amazed at what you do, how you do it, and really looking forward.
I'm equally delighted and thank you. I've got some thought-provoking questions for me to go back and think about, especially about, how do I think about delight in a very structural way? So maybe the next time around, we should catch up and have that conversation. Is there a way to put a framework to delight?
I think that's going to be sooner than later though. Yeah?
Maybe.
I have a feeling of that.
Fingers crossed for that.
Thank you.